Hey folks, I'm finally in college! I'm a big boy now! I'm in a closet.
So this is my dorm room. Oh, and here's my roommate Corey. How's it going, Corey?
Fuck off.
Okay.
Pokemon Platinum, where would I be without you? I was big into Pokemon as a kid. I don't remember exactly how I got into it, but I'm assuming it was from the anime or the trading cards or something. At any rate, when I would go over to my friend's house and watch him play Diamond and Pearl on his DS, I thought, this is the coolest shit ever! And I just had to play it for myself. That Christmas, I was fortunate enough to get a DS that I shared with my older sister, I kept it to myself mostly, and a brand spanking new Pokemon game. Unfortunately, that Pokemon game was Pokemon Ranger Shadows of Almia, and I got pretty upset pretty quickly when I found out this was not the game that I wanted. Thankfully, sometime later, I finally got my hands on the legendary title that originally sparked my love for video games, Pokemon Platinum. I was pretty hot shit back then for having it. I remember several kids in my class being all like, "Whoa, you have Pokemon Platinum?" And I was like, well, yeah, it's the latest Pokemon game, what's the big deal? I later found out that Platinum was actually the enhanced version of Diamond and Pearl, and that most of my peasant peers were jealous that they were stuck with an inferior product. Pokemon Platinum gave me countless hours of fun and a ton of memories as a kid, and replaying it is always a lot of fun. It's my favorite video game of all time, and each new playthrough is a joyride of great gameplay and nostalgic bliss. Of course, it's not perfect. Video games age, and at 11 years old, Platinum is bound to have some issues that may lessen the overall experience if you have the nostalgia goggles off. As I find my way through a new, challenging phase of life, I thought I'd revisit some of my old favorites and see if the artistic masterpiece I remember playing when I was 7 still holds up today. I was happy back then. Our adventure begins in the small, quaint town of Twinleaf, where we meet our rival, whom I named Brendan after the guy who's been haunting me for all these years, after he barges into our room unannounced. Come on, man, I could have been jerking off in there. Don't you know the tween bro code? Our adventure really begins after we talk to the parents for a few seconds and venture just a bit too far outside our isolated community and step into tall grass without Pokemon. Professor Rowan shows up to scold us, and it makes me wonder, if we still don't have a Pokemon of our own and it's too dangerous to go into the outside world without one, how do we get food? Yeah, Pokemon's world building has always been kinda lackluster. They never really take the time to flesh out the details of society or day-to-day life in the Pokemon world. That's not to say they don't put in any effort at all. In fact, they go to great lengths to put a lot of locations and game mechanics into the context of a cohesive world, but there are so many little things that just don't add up. So many little details that either have murky and incomplete explanations at best, or go completely unanswered. Like, is there a government? Is there an economy? Do any of these people have jobs? Do we need to eat, sleep, or go to the bathroom? Why does my mom have a room? And why is everything so fucking small? Seriously, these settlements are tiny. Twinleaf Town has 4 houses in it. That's not a small town, that's a cul-de-sac. At any rate, we swear up and down to Rowan that we in fact think Pokemon are pretty neat and finally get our starters. I went with Piplup since it's my favorite Pokemon, and we promptly ensue the first rival battle Spamfest Spectacular. We return home and I talk to my mom for one of very few times throughout the game, and she finally gives me the running shoes. God, why do you have to unlock these? What is the purpose of making me move painfully slow for the first few minutes of the game? After we finally gain the ability to move faster than me in the morning, our rival gets the bright idea to capture a legendary Pokemon at the nearby lake. After encountering some weird guy named Cyrus that I'm sure we won't have to worry about later, our rival realizes that, before we attempt to tame a legendary beast of godlike power with our weakling pets who can barely battle their way out of a wet paper bag, we need Pokeballs. We just need to take a quick detour to Rowan's lab, get us some balls, and we'll be capturing a deity in no time. Oh, do we want to name our starter Pokemon? Pingu. Perfect. So, we never really follow up with Rowan on the whole Pokeball situation, huh? The whole reason we went to his lab in the first place is to get balls for catching the legendary lake Pokemon, and the game just never touches on that again. He just tells us to complete the Pokedex and then we're off on the adventure. Dawn, unhelpful as always, shows us what a Pokemon Center and Pokemart are and tells me to tell Mom about my fun adventure before I go. I tell my mother that I'm leaving and will probably never see her again, and the rival's mom gives me a parcel to take to our old pal in the next city. We meet up with Dawn again, who, in the time-honored Pokemon tradition, gives us an unskippable tutorial showing us how to catch a Pokemon, and at long last it seems like we have some room to breathe. Not too long after, I catch myself my first new party member, a trusty Starly that I've decided to name Falco. I've always liked Starly. I pretty much always use one whenever I play through Platinum. It's decently strong throughout the entire adventure, and it's especially helpful early game for fighting grass types that Piplup can't deal with. Well, after making our way through Route 202, we finally reach Jubilife City. It's a pretty nice place with great music and an overall very relaxing urban environment. There isn't a ton to do here, but we have our first run-in with Looker, the only evidence that this place actually has laws or a police force. He's apparently an agent of the International Police, traveling the globe and catching bad guys. We'll see more of him later, and though he isn't a hugely consequential character, I'd still find him an amusing addition to the adventure. We then meet up with our rival and give him that parcel from earlier, which contains 2 maps, one for him and one for me. Awfully convenient. He gives us the word to head to Orberg City next, but before we do that, I decided to quickly explore Route 204 to the north. There isn't much here except a few trainer battles, and you can't progress any further until you get an HM, so off to Route 203, I guess. Here we again encounter our rival, who challenges us to another battle that actually turns out to be more than just spamming one move over and over. And I think now is a great time to talk about how fucking slow this game is. Good god, it gets to be mind-numbing. I enjoy Pokemon battles, they're fun and the mechanics and strategies are well designed, but couldn't they be just a little faster? It's not that bad at first, but eventually it gets to a point where you're fighting constant battles over and over and seeing the same menus and flavor text over and over, and I'm really grateful I'm playing this on an emulator. And this goes beyond just battling. Yeah, spamming the same moves and watching the HP bar go down at a snail's pace is annoying by itself, but this is a trend throughout the entire game. The text is slow, movement is slow, navigating menus is slow, using HMs is slow, loading is slow, going through tall grass and water routes and caves is slow because of how absurdly high the encounter rate is. I'm aware I can be a bit of an impatient person, but I know I'm not the only one who has this problem. It's one of the most common criticisms of this game, actually. Honestly, just chilling out a bit and using the emulator's speed-up function when necessary helped mitigate a lot of the frustration with slowness for me, but it still wears on you after a while. And if you're playing this on an actual DS, you're shit out of luck when it comes to speed-up options. After beating our rival, we trudge through the next route in a small cave and finally enter Orberg City. This town is based around a coal mine, which is one of the few pieces of evidence that there's any sort of economy in the Pokemon world whatsoever. I actually really like the aesthetics of it though, with the piles of dirt and moving conveyor belts and overall industrial theming. That is, until you actually have to enter the mine to find the gym leader and get... Yeah, here we get our first taste of what it's like to go through a cave in this game. Every step you take, every goddamn tile you tread is a dice roll. An absurdly high encounter rate coupled with the annoying amount of time it takes between when a battle starts and when you can actually flee and return back to the overworld makes cave exploration in this game absolutely miserable. It's easier to deal with later in the game when you can actually afford a decent amount of repels, but at this early point in the game it's a fucking slog. At least I found some cool new Pokemon here. See, I first went up to Route 207 and caught myself a Machop, which I creatively named Choppa. After I went into the mine and realized that Machop doesn't really add anything to my team at this point in the game in terms of type coverage, I decided to pick up a Geodude instead, which I named Dwayne because I'm funny. But then... the Great Onyx Disaster of 2020. Onyx is a decent Pokemon, and I'm always a sucker for rare encounters, so I thought, hey, why not? But this fucker took an ungodly amount of time to capture. I could not fucking catch it for some reason. It just wouldn't stay in the damn ball. Only after 10 minutes and a lot of soft resets was I able to catch it with a Dusk Ball that I'm not quite sure how I got this early in the game, to be honest. Still pretty bizarre that it took so much time and dice rolls to catch a level 9 Pokemon in a 4 times effective ball though. Certainly didn't help make my cave spelunking less of a miserable grind, that's for sure. I decided to name it Disaster in honor of Jay Witz's own Great Onyx Disaster from his 2013 X and Y playthrough. Shout out to him, by the way, that Let's Play kept me entertained many times over. I highly recommend if you're looking for something to watch. Another funny story about Onyx, actually. One time way back when I first played through this game, a friend of mine, actually the same friend that I watched play through Diamond and Pearl before I had the game for myself, traded me an Onyx. He said I could give him one of my garbage team members, and I think I traded him a Bidoof or something. Little did I know, he was only trading me the Onyx so he could evolve it. So just as I ecstatically watched my sweet new Onyx evolve into a Steelix right before my eyes, he asked me to trade it back. I was eventually able to get a Steelix of my own, but the feeling of betrayal I felt in that moment, never forgave him for that. Anyway, after we find the gym leader and convince him to actually do his job, we're finally able to challenge the first gym. Gyms have gotten a lot of flack from some critics for never really updating their mechanics or format throughout the series and being really easy to sweep with a single type, and while true, I still have always kinda liked gyms for some reason. I feel they have a certain charm to them, and they serve as an actual tangible marker of your progress throughout your adventure. Whenever you beat a gym, you know you've reached a milestone, and I've always appreciated that. Platinum's first gym leader, Rourke, is kind of a pushover. He carries on the time-honored Pokemon tradition of the pathetically weak first gym leader that uses rock types, which allows them to get wiped by 2 of the 3 starter Pokemon. My Piplup is one of those too, so I was able to make pretty quick work of him. His Cranidos almost gave me a bit of trouble, but not really. So we beat Rourke, and surprise surprise, Pingu evolves! Evolution is one of my favorite mechanics in Pokemon games, the anticipation of knowing your Pokemon's just one level away from evolving, or the excitement of not knowing exactly when it'll evolve. Evolving Pokemon is a small thrill every time. I always find joy in watching my party members grow and change into a new Pokemon with better stats and new moves, and it's a nice representation of you and your team's growth throughout the adventure. Pingu evolves into Prinplup and learns Metal Claw, which is a nice move to have for type coverage at this point in the game. After that, Rourke gives us our very first gym badge, which allows us to use Rock Smash. I don't think there is a single Pokemon player who doesn't hate HMs. HMs function to lock certain areas of the game until you've done the proper parts of the story, and can give certain locations more depth with optional sections that are accessible with certain HMs. And that's all fine and good. I see the necessity of blocking off parts of the game in order to ensure proper progression through the campaign. And I honestly enjoy the extra layering that HMs give to certain routes and towns by giving you something to come back for after you've unlocked the right HM. Here's the problem. HMs are Pokemon moves. This forces you to waste a move slot on a perfectly good party member, or if you opt to use a dedicated HM slave instead, forces you to waste an entire team slot to travel through much of the game. Also, HMs are permanent. You can't forget them like normal moves until way later in the game when you can find a dedicated move deleter to get rid of them. This means that for most of the adventure you're stuck with these dogshit utility moves that, with few exceptions, are almost worthless in battle. Also, there are 8 of them! 8! That is the equivalent of 2 entire Pokemon solely for using HMs. I opted to spread them out across my entire team with some dedicated HM slaves for lesser used HMs later in the game that I would swap out as needed. So I was able to have a full team of 6 for my adventure, but I had to make a lot of tough decisions on which party members to switch out at what time and what moves I was going to live without. But fuck, why couldn't these just be items? Honestly, HMs are probably my biggest problem with this game and Pokemon games as a whole. They're so limiting and so annoying to have to deal with. It's a frustrating reality of every Pokemon game up until Gen 7 when they finally figured out that there were better ways of controlling player progression. Although I'd argue that in terms of HMs, the Sinnoh games are the most egregious of the bunch. Anyway, access to Rock Smash allows us to progress through Route 204, which was previously blocked off as I said earlier. So we head back to Jubilife City, and who else do we find but Looker? He tells us he's found no suspicious characters in his investigation of the city, but that we should keep an eye out for shady grown-ups. I found him. Doesn't look like his investigation was very thorough. This is our first run-in with Team Galactic. They're this game's mandatory evil team that's going to be the main source of conflict in the plot. They're sort of made out to be comic relief villains and more of an incompetent nuisance than an actual threat. The grunts for the most part are, but I honestly enjoy all their strange mannerisms and funny dialogue, and they have some pretty kick-ass music. These 2 grunts here are demanding Rowan and Dawn hand over some research materials. Naturally, Rowan says no and starts talking trash, and we have a quick double battle with Dawn to settle our differences. They'll go on to cause some bigger problems later on in the game, but crisis averted for now. After that kerfuffle, we continue up through Route 204 and finally break those accursed waist-height rocks in the ravaged path to progress forward. It's a pretty short route the rest of the way, with just a couple of trainer battles and not much else. Falco evolved into Staravia here though, so that's something. At long last, we reach Floroma Town. This is definitely one of the better locations in Sinnoh. It's so relaxing and has such a nice atmosphere. I really like how the region is spaced out with smaller thematic settlements in between the big gym cities. Gardening is the big gimmick here, with flower fields covering the entire town and surrounding area, and a berry shop where we get a watering can and a couple of berries to start us out on our planting escapades. You can plant berries at various locations throughout the region, which over time will eventually grow into multiple berries. Berries can have a variety of effects in battles like restoring HP or PP and curing status effects, and can actually be used as a held item so you don't have to waste a turn on healing. They're nice in theory, but I hardly ever use them, and they're pretty sparse throughout the region unless you put in the effort to plant and harvest them. But I don't really have the vigilance or care to do that either. See, usually when I plant berries, I'll have forgotten about them by the time that I can actually harvest them, and I don't really return to areas that I've already visited, so it's unlikely that I'll just happen to come across them. But even in the event that I remember they're there, I'll probably be too lazy to actually go and get them anyway. I mostly just stick to buying potions. So first we have to head out to Route 205, where a little girl tells us that Team Galactic has taken her dad hostage at the nearby Valley Windworks. We go over there, fight a galactic grunt, and learn that we have to go back to the meadow near Floroma Town to get a key from some other grunts in order to actually access the Windworks. We find two of them harassing some guy and demanding honey. We quickly take care of them and get our hands on the key to the Windworks and some sweet, sweet honey, not sponsored, although I wish I was. Honey can be slathered on specific trees throughout the game to attract Pokemon. It's a neat little mechanic and actually the only way to get certain Pokemon like Combee, Heracross, and Munchlax. But it's got a lot of the same problems that berry planting has for me. It takes 6 hours for a Pokemon to appear after you place down the honey, by which time I've usually forgotten about it, or have at least forgotten which tree I actually put the honey on. And I'm usually too lazy to go back and look for it. It's also on a time limit where whatever Pokemon you attracted will disappear if you don't check the tree within 24 hours, and the timing seems to not work out for me a lot for whatever reason. I also don't particularly care for most of the Pokemon that you can get through honey trees anyway, so while I see its value, it's just not for me. Works key in hand, we head back to the Valley Windworks to have our first major confrontation with Team Galactic. The Galactic Grunt Gauntlet is something that happens a lot in this game, where you have to storm one of their bases or some area they've taken over and then battle one of their leaders at the end, which isn't a criticism or anything, I just thought it was interesting to point out. Here we fight our way through a couple of grunts and face off against Commander Mars for our first big galactic boss battle. This fight was a bit more annoying than I expected. That Purugly was a bitch to deal with. It wasn't insanely strong or anything, but it was unreasonably bulky and my attacks barely did any damage. Thankfully, I was eventually able to overcome the feline menace, run Team Galactic out of the Windworks, and free the hostage. Only after does Looker show up to investigate, whereupon he finds out that a literal child did his job better than him. I know it's a bit of a tired refrain at this point to ask, why is a kid tasked with saving the world, huh? Isn't that wacky? Isn't that a wacky plot hole? At this point, you just kinda gotta accept that it's a children's game set in a fantasy world, and the developers probably wanted their target audience to relate to the protagonist rather than cater to the fun police. But at the same time, he's 12. Looker then tells us that Team Galactic has a hideout in Eterna City, which is also where we find the next gym. And with that, we're off to continue our quest to beat the Pokemon League and eliminate the Bowl-Cut Spacemen. With the Galactic Grunts no longer blocking the bridge, we can finally explore Route 205. I've always liked Route 205 for some reason. It's pretty short, but it has such a relaxing and lighthearted atmosphere. We continue on through, battle a couple trainers, and finally reach Eterna Forest. We meet some lady named Cheryl who wants to travel with us through the forest because she's afraid of Team Galactic. And who wouldn't trust a 12-year-old kid to be their personal bodyguard? This is the first of several partner missions throughout the game where you'll travel through a dungeon alongside a companion trainer, which the fan community has apparently called stat trainers because they each have Pokemon that are strong in a specific stat. I never actually noticed that, but hey, it's interesting. During these partner missions, all trainers and wild Pokemon are fought in double battles, and your party is automatically healed after each fight. It's very convenient because you don't have to waste money on healing items, and a lot of the time your partner will just absorb damage for you while your Pokemon does all the fighting. On the flip side, double battles can be kind of annoying because they just take so much longer. There's so much more text and menus and animations you have to go through than in a normal battle, and considering how slow this game is, as I've discussed before, it gets old fast. Double battles with AI also aren't as fun because you can't really coordinate with them. Double battles are interesting in theory because they add an extra layer of strategy and the ability to optimally pair up Pokemon and attacks. But a lot of that strategy gets removed when the second Pokemon is controlled by an AI because you can't know or direct what their next move is. In this format, you pretty much just have to think for yourself and sometimes try to guess what your partner is gonna do, which sucks because I'm wrong half the time and that can make battles go horribly wrong or at least drag on way longer than they need to. For example, Cheryl's Chansey is fucking useless and can't attack for shit, so I just have to hope that the enemies attack her instead of me while my Pokemon does all the work. It gets pretty annoying when I get focused down. At any rate, we eventually make it out of the forest, and I decide to immediately turn back and catch myself a Budew. I named it Flowey because, like, the flower from Undertale? I don't know, I never played it. I level up Flowey a bit by fighting some fishermen, including the guy with 6 Magikarps who's in every Pokemon game for some reason, and at long last we reach Eterna City. Eterna City is a very relaxed, rustic-feeling town based around history and culture. Here we can find the Explorer kit, which I'll talk about later, and more importantly, the next gym. After talking to the gym leader, we catch up with this stupid bastard who takes us to see a Pokemon statue in the center of town. We see another familiar face who muses vaguely about time and space and Sinnoh's myth for a little while and then leaves. I decide to explore the small area to the east for a little while, and I catch myself a bronzer. I decided to name it 3rd place after the placement I got in the Pokemon nicknaming contest. I head back to the Pokemon Center to add it to the team, and on the way we have our first run-in with Cynthia. She'll become more important as the story progresses, but for now all she does is tell us a bit about Sinnoh mythology and gives us the HM for Cut. After booting Dwayne off the team, I battle a couple more trainers, explore the small accessible area of Mount Coronet, and at last we're off to challenge the gym. This one's a grass gym where you have to defeat trainers to move the hands on the clock at the center and make your way to the gym leader. It ultimately amounts to defeat all the trainers to reach the end, so it isn't much of a puzzle, but it's a pretty aesthetic at least. Thanks to type advantages, I was able to wipe the whole thing with just Falco, and in no time at all I'm finally able to face off against Gardenia. This motherfucker gave me so much trouble as a kid. Back when I first played this game, I did what all 7-year-olds new to Pokemon did and tried to solo the game with my starter. I chose Piplup and naturally ran into some issues when fighting a type that it was weak against. I got stomped by that stupid fucking Roserade over and over again until my birthday party when a good friend traded me a Starly. I don't remember exactly how strong it was because I didn't really pay much attention to levels or stats at the time, but it was over-leveled enough that it would disobey my commands half the time, which is what happens when a Pokemon received in a trade is a higher level than the limit set by your amount of gym badges. Despite those difficulties though, I was eventually able to overcome the gym thanks to the trusty overpowered Starly. It evolved into a Staravia after the battle and became a permanent fixture on my team from then on. Still left me with a lifelong fear of Gardenia though. Thankfully, she isn't nearly as big of a challenge this time as she was when I was a youngin'. Thanks to the power of having a Pokemon with a type advantage, I was able to make pretty quick work of her. And this is kind of a problem with gyms. Although I still like them in concept, specializing in a single type can cause some problems. As my differing encounters with Gardenia may demonstrate, gym leaders can often be brutally difficult if you don't have a type advantage, but a total cakewalk if you do. In some respects, this is good because it teaches players the importance of the type chart and incentivizes them to have a more balanced team composition. However, gyms primarily just encourage players to brute force it with a type advantage rather than teach them any of the ins and outs of the more advanced game mechanics. There's a lot more to Pokemon battles beyond the type chart, but the games are so piss easy that there's usually little incentive to utilize things like buffs and debuffs and status effects. And this is indicative of a larger problem. Pokemon is just too easy. It just doesn't provide enough of a challenge for obstacles to actually be enjoyable to overcome, especially for someone who's been playing Pokemon for over 10 years. At the same time, you don't necessarily want these games to have a difficulty curve designed for veteran players when they're primarily made for a young, casual audience, so it makes sense that Pokemon games are relatively easy. And this gripe isn't specific to Platinum, this is pervasive throughout pretty much every modern Pokemon game, and Platinum is still more of a reasonable challenge than a lot of the more recent entries. But this is why I appreciate things like Nuzlocke and ROM hacks, because they put a more challenging spin on traditional Pokemon games without detracting from the needs of the core audience. I think they should just add a difficulty setting, to be honest. So we defeat Gardenia, and she gives us the Forest Badge, allowing us to use the only HM worse than Rock Smash, Cut! This conveniently allows us to access the Team Galactic building at the northern end of town, and who else do we find inside but Looker? He's cleverly disguised as a Team Galactic grunt and gives us the lowdown on the place. There are multiple different stairways, and you have to take the right path to continue to the top. You can actually pretty easily tell the right path, whichever one has a sign on the wall is the way to go, but I'm a psychopath and want to thoroughly explore every location, so naturally I'm gonna take all the wrong ways first. This area is another Team Galactic dungeon where you have to fight your way through all the grunts and then battle the boss at the end. Once we reach the top, we face off against Commander Jupiter for our second big galactic boss battle. This battle was actually pretty annoying. First there was the Zubat that kept making me flinch with Bite over and over, and then there was the Skuntank that kept poisoning me and using Night Slash, which is a pretty powerful move at this point in the game. I actually used a battle item for one of very few times in my career. Thankfully this fight wasn't any problem that spamming potions couldn't solve. Well, apparently Team Galactic took this guy's Pokemon, but they're reunited at last after I ran Team Galactic out of the building. And it's a good thing I did, because this guy owns the local bike shop. But before I can cash in my brownie points for free stuff, who comes along but Cynthia again? She wants to give me an egg. I'm allergic, but I guess. But first I need to make room in my party for it. It was nice knowing you, Choppa. Pokemon eggs are kinda interesting in the context of breeding, but when it's just NPCs giving them to you, it's more just annoying that you have to walk around to hatch it and the Pokemon's just gonna be level 1. I'd rather they just give me a Pokemon without having to jump through all these extra hoops. Anyway, we enter the shop and finally get ourselves a bike. The bike is as much of a Pokemon staple as the Pokemon themselves, and in this game it allows us to go up muddy slopes and, more importantly, access the cycling road to progress forward. It also lets you travel the region at incredible speeds, far faster than you could go on foot. In this game, the bike has two settings: 3rd gear, which is slower but more steady, and 4th gear, which is much faster but harder to control. Personally, I've never used 3rd gear in my life, and I question your life choices just a little if you do. The bike obviously is incredibly convenient for navigating the region at a quicker pace, but I do have one big issue with it. You can't hear the music. Using the bike has a dedicated theme that overrides the normal background music. It's not a particularly bad song, but I like hearing all the other incredible and diverse tracks that the game has to offer. You can reset the background music back to normal while riding the bike if you enter a new area, but that's not always doable, and sometimes it's just a bit of a hassle, so I often stick to just running. So we fight our way through Cycling Road, battle a few more trainers outside Mount Coronet, and meet up again with Dawn. She gives us the Versus Seeker, which allows you to rematch trainers, and the Dowsing Machine, which allows you to search for hidden items. Then we venture forth through Mount Coronet. This is our second visit to Mount Coronet during the adventure, and it'll become a frequent presence as the game progresses. Not much exploring to do this time around, but we do have another run-in with Cyrus, who laments the weakness of the human spirit or something, I don't know. We continue through to the other side, battle a few trainers on the next route, and then I realize I forgot something. So the cycling road actually has an entirely separate route to explore directly below it. There isn't a ton to do here, but there are some rare Pokemon that you can't find anywhere else, like this Gligar I caught. I named it Dave. At the northern end of the route, you can find the entrance to Wayward Cave, which is one of my favorite locations in this game because it combines my two favorite features: high encounter rates and not being able to see shit. I fucking hate dark caves. Not being able to see most of the area you're exploring is annoying enough, but as a person who has a compulsion to scour every square inch of every location in the game, it's especially frustrating because it forces me to walk around way more just to make sure I don't miss anything, which is a gigantic waste of my time. For one, I don't normally find anything as a result of these efforts anyway, and for two, walking on more tiles forces me into way more wild encounters that, as I've mentioned before, happen pretty frequently in caves. These problems can, of course, be mitigated through the use of repels and the move Flash. Thing is, I don't have any repels because I'm broke, and teaching a Pokemon Flash is kind of a commitment. It's not an HM, thankfully, but it is still a disposable TM, so you have to use it wisely. You don't want to use it on a main party member because it's not used frequently enough to merit wasting a move slot on it, but you also don't want to delete it later in case you need to use it again. The solution to this dilemma, of course, is to just use a dedicated Pokemon for Flash that you switch into your party as needed, but I didn't have any extra Pokemon on hand that could learn Flash, and it's not really worth the time investment to go and catch one. So here we are. I continue exploring the cave and struggling with wild Zubats for a while, and what do you know, the egg hatches. And it's a Togepi. I named it Hamlet. Wayward Cave also has a second entrance hidden under the bridge. This allows you to explore a basement area full of slopes and ramps that you need your bike to navigate. I actually like a lot of these biking obstacle courses, but it can be kinda hard to go fast over these ramps when you're getting stopped by wild Pokemon. However, it is here and only here that we can find our next team member, Gibble. It's pretty rare, but after a little while I finally found one and named it Gibby! I found a couple more items, including the TM for Earthquake, but other than that, there isn't a lot to this area. Except there's apparently another companion mission with a trainer named Myra in the main area, but I never found her? I don't know, it's hard to explore when you can't see. Afterwards, we continue on through the next routes to finally reach Hearthome City. I save a woman's Baneri from certain doom, and a fisherman guy takes me to the contest hall. He wants me to go inside, but before I do that, I decide to take a visit to see Bebe? Beebe? Beeb? Let's go with Beeb. She's the administrator of the Pokemon box system, and meeting her changes the PC menu to say Beeb's PC rather than someone's PC, but more importantly, she offers to give us an Eevee. But before I can accept it, I need to make some room in my party for it. So I stop at the Pokemon Center, battle some reporters that are in there for some reason, and free up a space in my party for our new Eevee. I named it Alpha. Why? I don't know, I recorded this a while ago. I then immediately put Eevee back in the box because I can't just give up on third place that easy. Hearthome City is also home to Amity Square, which is honestly one of my favorite places in the whole game. Here you can go for a stroll with a cute member of your party, and as this dejected and outraged NPC points out, I don't think it's the game's place to decide which Pokemon are cute and which ones aren't, but nevertheless I was able to bring Pingu in for some quality bonding. This place is apparently built around some old ruins with rock cuts that inexplicably allow you to warp to other rock cuts throughout the area and pick up some items. You can also talk to your companion Pokemon to see how it's doing, which will give you some pretty adorable flavor text and occasionally some free stuff. And that's about it for Amity Square. It's pretty small and there really isn't a whole lot to do here, but it's such a charming concept and is such a pleasant location to just walk around in. There are a few other interesting places throughout the city, like the church and the Pokemon fan club, but everyone knows the real star of the show here, the contest hall. We meet again with the girl whose Baneri we saved earlier. She's one of the contest judges and she gives us some glitter for our troubles. We also get a surprise visit from Mom, who gives us a sexy tux for our contest exploits and debauchery. And finally, we talk to Fantina, the city's gym leader, allowing us to access her gym which was previously blocked off. And at last we can partake in the main attraction of this area, the contests. Anyway, our next gym up is the Heart Home City Gym. This one's a ghost gym. The main gimmick here is that you have to navigate in the dark using a flashlight to find a symbol on the ground and then enter the correct door marked with the same symbol. But, I think something's wrong with my emulator. See, the gym is supposed to be dark, so you actually have to put some effort into finding the right symbols and probably run into some trainers. But on here, either because of the ROM itself or the lighting functions of the emulator, the gym is completely lit up and I can easily see exactly where I need to go, which completely ruins any puzzle elements this place might have had. At any rate, I battled all the trainers anyway because it'd be a sin not to, and finally reached the third gym battle with Fantina. Her first Pokemon was a Duskull, which really wasn't too big of a problem aside from Will-O-Wisp, but then she sends out her Mismagius and all hell breaks loose. This thing was way too strong for me to handle. First I send out Flowey, who thankfully gets off a Stun Spore before it becomes very apparent that Mismagius can easily two-shot it, so I switch out to Falco, who promptly gets wrecked without so much as a point of damage thanks to confusion. So then I'm forced to send in Hamlet for his first battle ever, where I desperately try to stall Mismagius out using Super Potions and hope that it'll ever be affected by paralysis and I can get some work done with Sweet Kiss and Metronome. Problem is, it took fucking forever for the Mismagius to actually be paralyzed at all, and it recovered from confusion almost immediately after I used Sweet Kiss on it. Metronome was also extremely unreliable, and I found it pretty much impossible to actually accomplish anything with. Running low on potions and options, I decide to send in third place, who gets almost destroyed by Confuse Ray and Shadow Ball. After a Shadow Ball takes me down to 1 health and lowers my special defense, I'm forced to switch back in Hamlet as a sacrifice so that I can get a free switch into Flowey, who also serves as a sacrifice for me to use a Super Potion to heal up third place, which I couldn't do while it was still out because its lowered special defense would have caused it to get one shot anyway. Now that its health is restored and its debuff erased, I send third place back in and thankfully get off a Confuse Ray. Mismagius continues to spam Shadow Ball, forcing me to keep using potions, and it then snaps out of confusion, which means I essentially wasted a bunch of potions for nothing. Luckily, its paralysis actually works for once, and I'm able to get off another Confuse Ray. However, it managed to outspeed me the next turn and use a Confuse Ray of its own, so now we're even more at the mercy of the RNG gods. Mismagius then hits itself while I manage to land an extra sensory, and finally we start to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Then, Fantina uses a Super Potion, almost completely healing the Mismagius back to full health, and I realize these efforts are going nowhere. It then snaps out of confusion and one-shots me with a random crit Shadow Ball. In one more last-ditch attempt to not get my team wiped, I send in a badly injured Pingu and use my one and only revive on Falco. And it is here that things finally start to turn around. I use another potion on Falco, and luckily the Mismagius gets paralyzed, allowing me to start setting up with Double Team. I continue to spam Double Team while the Mismagius gets paralyzed a few more times and misses a Psybeam. And I think it actually ran out of PP for Psybeam after that because it starts just using Magical Leaf. I finally start to get some work done with Wing Attack, and soon enough the foul beast Mismagius is slain at last. Fantina sends in a Haunter as her last Pokemon, but it isn't nearly as much of a problem as Mismagius was thanks to my prior setup with Double Team. Save for a very close call from a critical hit Sucker Punch, I was able to heal up Falco using my last Super Potion and take the Haunter down without much issue. Finally, after a tense and harrowing struggle, we finally get our hands on the Relic Badge. That battle was terrifying and stressful, probably the hardest one yet, but we did it. Even though it was a bit of a slog at times, that gym battle was what I live for in Pokemon games. Those moments where it's a real challenge, when you're really in trouble, just barely hanging on and you're not sure how you're gonna make it out. Those moments where you really have to stop and think carefully about what your next moves are gonna be. Those moments when just one lucky break turns the tide, when a gamble pays off, when one team member comes through for you in a way you didn't expect, when you finally win and feel like you really earned it and struggled for it. It's those moments of fear and stress and contemplation and excitement and satisfaction that I truly live for in Pokemon. We last left off having beaten the third gym leader, and if you'll recall that battle, you might know that there is a significant lack of using Disaster in it. That was mainly because Miss Magius knew Magical Leaf and would have destroyed him in one hit, but we're about to see an even more significant lack of using Disaster because I decided to swap him out in favor of Gibby. To be honest, I never intended for Disaster to be a long-term team member. He's not very strong, and I can't evolve him on an emulator anyway without cheats that I don't feel like installing. Gibble, although a bit weak right now, will definitely be a lot more valuable later on. We then head off to the next route, and our good pal Brendan ambushes us in the gate for a battle. It was pretty uneventful, he's kinda easy. And we continue on to Route 209. I found a Chansey, which is pretty rare. I didn't catch it, but I did knock it out for some sweet EXP. Also, I don't have any footage of this for some reason, but I caught a Ralts and named it Meta Knight. I decided to swap him out with 3rd place because, again, he's gonna be a lot more useful in the long run. One notable place on this route is the Lost Tower. The Lost Tower is the designated graveyard that a lot of Pokemon games have, like the Lavender Tower in Red and Blue or Mount Pyre in Ruby and Sapphire. I will say, it is interesting how Pokemon games actually explore the concept of death. You'd think that given how they only ever show Pokemon fainting even when hit with attacks that are pretty brutal if you stop to think about them, and also given that these are games targeted towards children, it would be easy to just pretend that death doesn't happen or just not acknowledge it. But no, they go out of their way to declare that yes, Pokemon can and do in fact die. They never really explored in too much depth, these designated graveyards are never super significant in the story, and we don't see much of the complexities of grief and loss since they're probably not really fit for Pokemon games, but it is still interesting to see these places in the games at all. It does raise the question of how exactly Pokemon die though. If they can get blasted in the face with scorching hot flames and live, what the hell kills them? Do Pokemon age? Can they get diseases? What are their actual physical properties? The game never provides any answers. Also notable about the Lost Tower is that it has a dense fog that obscures your vision and gets worse as you progress up the tower. It isn't really much of a problem in the overworld here, although it does actually hinder your navigation in other locations in the game, but in battles, my god, it's annoying. Fog lowers the accuracy of pretty much every move, which makes battles so much more annoying and tedious. Of course, you can always get rid of it with a handy HM. I know I sound like a bit of a broken record complaining about HMs, but dear god, why would I throw away a move slot for a long-ass time when there's like 3 areas with fog in the whole game? So I'm just kind of forced to live with the agony of battles being even slower than they already are. But of course, there are these 2 sweet old ladies who want me to get rid of the fog, so what do? At the end of Route 209, we find Solaceon Town. This is one of my favorite settlements in the game. It's very quaint and comforting. It's a small town, but there are a couple notable things you can find here. First is a Pokemon daycare. Daycares are where you can leave Pokemon to level up at a snail's pace over time, or if you leave 2 of them, you can find Pokemon eggs. This is a process known as Pokemon breeding, which is pretty much necessary for competitive battling and pretty helpful for completing the Pokedex or just finding specific Pokemon that you can't catch in the wild. They say no one has ever seen a Pokemon lay an egg, and no one understands how Pokemon eggs get there, which I guess makes sense not to explain since it's a game for children, but we all know they're just having... You can also find seals. Seals. Seals basically allow you to make little custom animations for when your Pokemon enters a battle. You can arrange a pretty big variety of effects and add them to a ball capsule, which you then attach to a party member. They're just an optional aesthetic thing, but it's honestly pretty fun to customize your capsules and give them your own unique flair. My only problem with them, why do you have to take them off to deposit a Pokemon in a box? I genuinely don't see any reason for this. I assume it was some technical limitation, although I have no clue what the issue would even be. There have been so many times when I've needed to swap out a Pokemon to use an HM or something, and then the game cockblocks me saying, no, you have to take off the ball capsule. And then I have to waste time detaching it and putting it back on afterwards. It's a pretty minor issue though. Overall, seals are a very cool and underrated feature. It's those little bits of personalization that I always really enjoy in Pokemon games. I'm really sad they took it out in later entries. And lastly, we have the Solaceon Ruins. This is basically just a place where you can find Unknown. Honestly, I never really understood why Pokemon tried to make Unknown into this sort of mysterious, mystical being when it's just a shit Pokemon with terrible stats and a non-existent move pool. It only ever has any relevance in this game and the Johto games, and even then its appearance is confined to just some bland ruins that give no actual lore or backstory and have no actual role in the overall plot. It's just kinda weird, honestly. This area has a bunch of branching paths where most will just take you to a dead end, and there's only one correct path that'll actually take you to the end of the cave. The unknown writing at the beginning of the ruins actually tells you where to go, but of course some of the empty rooms have items in them, so I'm gonna be exploring everywhere anyway. At any rate, we eventually reach the bottom of the ruins, where there's some hippie scripture on the wall written in unknown letters. Friendship. All lives touch other lives to create something anew and alive. I'm gonna start using that as a pickup line. We can also find a couple goodies in this room, including the HM for defog. I am not going back into that tower. There's also this stupid inaccessible area at the top of the ruins. The only way to get here is by talking to a guy found in a cave on a later route, who challenges you to catch all 26 alphabetical forms of unknown while he digs a tunnel. Each room in the ruins houses a different letter, and fun fact, if you go straight through the path laid out by the plaque at the beginning, the unknown letters found in each room spell out the word friend, a thing you probably don't have if you're trying to catch all 26 unknown, while the remaining 20 letters are found in all the other rooms. If you really hate sex and manage to capture all 26 unknown forms, the guy from earlier will have completed the tunnel, allowing you to catch the last two forms of unknown, the question mark and the exclamation point. And of course it also allows you to access the previously inaccessible ledge where you can find one rare candy. I never actually did this because I don't hate myself enough, but hey, it's an option. All kidding aside, I actually really appreciate stuff like this. Even though I never did it myself, it's nice to have all these extra challenges that you don't have to complete but are totally available and offer rewards to more adventurous players. The game gives you a lot of freedom, and all the optional side quests really help to make it feel more like your own adventure. The fact that these missions are optional makes you feel like you earn the rewards you get from them, which adds a lot more wonder and fulfillment to the experience. Next up is Route 210. These two trainers here confused the hell out of me as a kid. I always read their names as Belle and Pa Ava and Matt, which made me wonder, where the hell is the third person? And apparently I wasn't the only one, because I actually found a forum post from a while back with the same question. It wasn't until many years later that I realized that Belle and Pa was the name of the trainer class, and Ava and Matt were the names of the two individual trainers. I wasn't very smart as a child. The one interesting place on this route is the Moo Moo Cafe. Just kidding, it's called Cafe Cabin for some reason. They sell what is quite possibly my favorite item in the game, Moo Moo Milk. Moo Moo Milk is a gift from God that heals 100 HP. They're perfect for when your party members get to that point where they have a high enough HP stat that super potions can't quite cut it, but why would you get hyper potions? Oh god. The jump from super potions to hyper potions is honestly kinda bizarre, going from healing 50 HP to 200. Hyper potions are pretty pricey at this point, especially since they heal more HP than you could ever possibly need for quite some time. So Moo Moo Milk quite nicely fills the niche in between. Other than that, there really isn't much to this place. Most of it is blocked off by Psyduck, who decided that here would be a really great place to stand. Oh, and also Meta Knight evolved into Curlia, so that's cool. And so we continue on east to Route 215. This route was never really my favorite. It's not particularly bad, it's just not super appealing to me. It's always raining here, and there are a lot of winding paths with ledges and cuttable trees, but nothing that's very interesting, to be honest. Hamlet evolved into Togetic though, which is quite helpful because maybe he'll finally have some half-decent stats now. After that route comes Veilstone City, one of the funkier cities in the region to be sure. It's got a bit of a cold, stony aesthetic, but a really bumpin' soundtrack. Salut, trainer, tu aimes les—
Oh fuck, a French guy!
For those curious, he says, "Hi trainer, do you like Pokemon?" And upon answering yes, he says, "Me too, they're awesome." That's right, I took French in high school, so I know what true agony feels like. One of the major attractions of this place is the department store, a large multi-story building where you can buy all the same items that you can get at a normal Pokemart and some TMs, I guess, I don't know. Okay, for real, there is a fairly big selection of items you can buy here, but it's mostly stuff I never really cared about anyway. Even the TM selection isn't that great, none of it is anything that I'd really consider actually using. This guy here gives me a Porygon, which is going straight to the box because I just don't really care about Porygon that much, to be honest. There's also a Team Galactic building here, though there really isn't much of it accessible at this point in the game. We'll come back to it later. We also get Flowey a massage because god fucking damn it, how is he not evolved by now? Giving your Pokemon a massage will raise its happiness level, which is pretty helpful for Pokemon like Flowey that only evolve when they reach a high enough happiness level. There's no way to actually view that stat in the game though, so I don't know what kind of effect massages actually have, and I swear to god sometimes these Pokemon just evolve completely at random, but massages are still nice to have assuming they actually work. And of course, who could forget the Game Corner, the leading cause of underage gambling. You can play on these, Slot machines, they're called slot machines, Jesus Christ. You can play on these slot machines, and I gotta say, it's pretty fun when you have the emulator on turbo mode and you're just pressing buttons haphazardly. You play the game to win coins. Win enough coins and you can exchange them for prizes I don't care about. Yeah, I wasted my time. Finally, there's the gym. This one's a fighting type gym where you have to move punching bags around to knock over tires and clear pathways. It's definitely one of the more creative and enjoyable gym puzzles, and it actually gave me a bit of trouble back when I was an idiot kid. It also looks like that massage from earlier worked because after a few battles, Flowey evolves into Roselia. I do like evolutions based on happiness level in theory, but in practice they aren't quite as fun. The only ways to increase a Pokemon's happiness are by just walking around with it in your party, feeding it vitamins, and having it win battles, while its happiness will decrease if it faints. You can't track a Pokemon's happiness level, so you never really have any idea when it's going to evolve, which means the experience basically boils down to just going about the game normally with the occasional god fucking damn it fainted, and then one day the Pokemon evolves. Since there's not a lot of interactivity features in these games, and the ones that exist don't affect happiness anyway, it never really feels like you're actually building a friendship with your Pokemon. It's more so just a lot of waiting. Anyway, the gym leader here is Maylene, who actually kinda kicked the shit out of me. Her Pokemon were surprisingly strong and out-leveled everyone on my team. To beat her, I used a lot of the same strategies I used with Fantina, actually. First was her Meditite, who was way too strong for Meta Knight, and even Falco couldn't handle it all that well. After using Double Team, he got taken out with a Rock Tomb, and I was forced to sacrifice Gibby to revive him. Thanks to Intimidate lowering the Meditite's attack and the Meditite missing a Rock Tomb, I was able to send Falco back in and take it out pretty easily. Then came Machoke. I used Double Team, but it hit a Rock Tomb anyway and almost one-shot Falco. I used a Super Potion, and luckily it missed a second Rock Tomb. But then it somehow managed to be faster than Falco and took him out the turn after. Then Flowey missed some Stun Spores and fainted too, so I sent in Hamlet to pull some status effect shenanigans with Yawn and Charm. I took an opportunity to heal Falco back up and then slowly whittled down the Machoke by spamming potions, status effects, and metronome. And finally her Lucario. This one was a real son of a bitch. Lucario was already a super strong Pokemon, and it also way out-leveled my entire team. I sacrificed Meta Knight to heal up Hamlet, who I then sent in and used Charm to lower the Lucario's attack. After sufficiently lowering its attack, I spammed it out until I ran out of Metronome PP and then sent in Pingu to finish the job. And with that, we finally get our 4th gym badge. We're officially halfway through the game. I'm just kidding, we're not even close. We meet Dawn outside the gym, and she says some Team Galactic grunts stole her Pokedex, so we have a fight outside their warehouse to get it back. After the battle, we meet up with Looker again, who takes us to investigate the inside of the warehouse. We can't get anywhere without a key, but we do pick up the HM for Fly, so that's helpful at least. Next order of business is Route 214. This is one of my favorite routes in the game. It's not particularly big or sprawling or anything, but I really enjoy the split pathway design, and there's some good battles to be had here. Here is also where we meet that digging guy who lets you access that other part of Salacion Ruins I was talking about earlier. He's called the Ruin Maniac, and like I said, I never actually did that side quest, but you can find the TM for dig here, so that's nice. Speaking of TMs, I finally decided to grow some balls and use one. I taught Gibby Earthquake because I was sure I was going to keep him as a long-term party member, and keeping dogshit move Sand Tomb wasn't doing me any favors. But man, using a TM takes some courage. Since they're only single-use items, you really have to think carefully about when you want to use them. You gotta be sure that it'll actually be a worthwhile investment. They are actually going to be keeping that party member long-term, they are actually going to be using that move a lot, that it's not going to get replaced by a better move later on, that your Pokemon isn't just going to learn the move by level up anyway. I don't know, this might just be a me thing, but the way that TMs are set up makes me not want to use them at all, except for maybe at the very end of the game. Like I said, you can only use them once, and most of the time when you find a TM, that's the only time you're getting that TM in the entire game, so you really have to use it wisely. Earthquake was definitely a worthwhile investment in this case, but most of the time I'm pretty reluctant to use TMs. I'm really glad they made them multi-use in later games. Next, we arrive at the Valor Lakefront. We can't access the actual lake right now, but we can access this place called Hotel Grand Lake. This is another area I really love. It's so charming and relaxing. There's a restaurant where you can battle some trainers, and hey, look at that, Gibby evolved. Took him long enough, the Gibbeline takes forever to level up. There's also the infamous Route 222 blocker guy who says we can't pass through because Sunny Shore City had a blackout, and man, Pokemon blockades are just insanely silly. There are good reasons to block off areas from a game design standpoint, but the in-game reasons they give can be pretty ridiculous. It might be kinda dumb if you think about it too much, but to me it kinda adds to the charm. And of course there's this lady who lost her sweet key, which I was able to find with the power of Google. I returned it to her and were able to enter her room to get a reward for our troubles. She gives us a flute, get your mind out of the gutter. After that, we continue on through the coastline of Route 213. It's a pretty short route, not much here except this guy who wants to see my Pokemon's feet. He claims that he can read Pokemon's thoughts through their footprints, and according to him, Flowey and I are a perfect match, just like he's a perfect match with the sex offender registry. We battle a couple more trainers and at last reach the gate of Pastoria City. Pastoria City is a lot like your average place in Florida, surrounded by swamp. It's connected to an area called the Great Marsh, which acts as this game's version of the Safari Zone. I never explored it. However, I did decide to finally venture underground. Remember that Explorer kit I got way back when? Yeah, it actually has a purpose. With just a click of a button and way too much time saving, you gain access to the underground, an expansive bonus optional area full of stuff to do. For example, you can dig in the walls for buried treasure. My game crashed. Well, I guess it's a good thing the game made me save my progress, because there could have been some pretty disastrous consequences if I wasn't playing on an emulator. That's right, it's story time again. See, back when I was a kid, I didn't really get the concepts of saving frequently or the DS has a limited battery life. Sure, I generally saved my progress when I was done with a play session, but for some reason I never noticed that red LED light saying, "Hey bitch, the system is about to die." So yeah, not once, but twice I lost a ton of progress because my DS battery died without me saving anytime recently, and needless to say, I was not a happy camper. I don't even have any memories of acknowledging the battery light's existence at all before I lost my progress. I'm not really sure how I got that tunnel visioned. I'm also not sure why I didn't learn my lesson the first time. Thankfully, I did eventually figure out what was going on. I realized the DS was not immortal and the wall outlet was my friend. Now I save all my games every 45 seconds just to be safe. But it's amazing what can happen when you're a dumb shit 7-year-old. Well, the game doesn't seem to appreciate my spelunking right now, but I'll be back. Another point of interest in this town is the move reminder. This guy's really handy. He'll teach your Pokemon any move that they can naturally learn at their current level or below. This mechanic is really helpful, especially for when you catch a Pokemon that's too high level to know a specific move you want, when you need a move that you don't normally use in the main game but is really helpful for certain situations like Mean Look for roaming legendaries, when you just want to change up your battle strategy, or if you deleted a move for a stupid HM and now you need it back. Also, a lot of the time, fully evolved Pokemon will have a few really good moves that can only be learned through the move reminder. My only gripe with this feature is that it requires you to trade a heart scale every time you learn a move. Heart scales can be a bitch to come by. There's a few of them scattered throughout the region, but the only ways to farm them are through Wild Love Disc. They have a 5% encounter rate and are only available in the post-game. This newspaper editor in Salacion Town who gives you them for finding certain Pokemon. Do you really expect me to turn my one Eevee into a Flareon just for an item? And the underground. This game hates me. Overall though, good mechanic, just not very accommodating to the lazy. Next on the agenda is a quick visit to Route 212, the route immediately to the west of the city, to pick up a very special item, the Dawnstone. This item allows us to evolve Meta Knight into what he was always meant to be, a Gallade. I mean, hey, I wanted to be a Gallade when I was younger too, but only the chosen will ever see the day. Now, thankfully, Gallade actually continues to learn moves as it levels up, but for most Pokemon that evolve by stones, taking the plunge this early sends your Pokemon's moveset on a one-way train to Fuckville. This actually adds an element of strategic decision-making to the team-building process. Do you wait to evolve your Pokemon and sacrifice better stats for a better move pool? Or do you evolve your Pokemon early and have it know Growl at level 50? I like this idea. It adds a bit more weight and risk to your actions and gives you just a little bit more autonomy in how you go about your adventure. It's like choosing when to start and stop puberty. Like, do I really have this much power? I wish I could do that in real life. I've always wanted to be an inch or two taller. That way people 6 feet and above would finally respect me. My problem with this mechanic though, and this honestly applies to a lot of Pokemon mechanics in general, is that it sorta works best in this perfect world where you don't know much of anything about the game and are completely unable to learn. I can see how waiting to evolve your Pokemon, not knowing anything about its specific learn set, and then having it learn some really good attack could be really satisfying because your gamble paid off. But, as a fucking maniac who completely plans out his teams before each playthrough, yeah, there's no mystery here. With the internet doing its whole existence thing, it's way too easy to go on Bulbapedia and see, oh, I just need to wait until this level, learn this move I want, and then use the stone. Like a lot of things in Pokemon games, I think it theoretically adds a bit more depth to the gameplay for inexperienced players, but doesn't do much for seasoned pros, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's the way it is. Anyway, enough dawdling, it's time we get a move on to the gym. But before we can go inside, our rival stops us and challenges us to a battle. He only has 4 Pokemon and none of them put up much of a fight besides a Staravia that kept spamming Double Team. I never really got this. I don't know, there's only so much you can do to make NPCs more challenging before you start screwing over newcomers, but I feel like the guy who's supposed to be my rival should be a little more challenging than this. I mean, Christ, his team way out-levels mine and they still can't get anything done. I just wish a lot of major trainers had stronger teams, have some better stats, better AI, have an actual unique strategy. Though I think a lot of it might come down to them just not having many particularly threatening attacks or attacks that can counter a type disadvantage. Like, look at his Buizel, it can't do shit against Flowey. Sure, it doesn't have a ton of reasonable options, but it can do better than Pursuit. I've seen slices of cheese hit harder than this. Not to mention, there are very few trainers in the entire game with 6 Pokemon. I get why most ordinary trainers have small teams, but there is no reason that this guy who's supposed to be going on the exact same adventure as me shouldn't have a full party of 6 by now. Ultimately, I get why this is, but it doesn't mean I'm a fan of it. And at long last, we can finally challenge the gym. This one's a water-type gym with a puzzle based around stepping on switches to change the water level and access different areas. It's pretty simple in implementation, but it's still one of my favorite gym puzzles in the game in terms of concept. I really like how each water level completely changes the layout of the gym and how you navigate it, and it forces you to think critically about how you want to progress. The trainers themselves weren't too big of a challenge, though. Flowey pretty much wiped the place. The gym leader himself, though, was a different story. Here we face off against Crasher Wake, who starts out with a very powerful Gyarados that Flowey could not deal with at all. So I turn to Ol Reliable, using Hamlet to spam Charm and lower the Gyarados' attack. After I do that, I send Flowey back in, the Gyarados immediately gets a crit with Bite, and because critical hits ignore stat changes, Flowey got one shot. So I send Hamlet back in, sacrifice him to revive Flowey, and then send Flowey back in hopes that the RNG gods give me a second chance. Thankfully, the Gyarados ended up getting poisoned after using Bite due to Flowey's ability Poison Point having a chance to poison opponents that use contact moves. I've gotta say, abilities are one of the best battle mechanics in this game. They open up so many options in terms of battle strategy and move selection, and can also come in pretty handy in a pinch, as seen here. So after I slowly take down the Gyarados, Wake sends in his Floatzel. It one-shot Flowey with Ice Fang. Well, looks like we're in a bit of a pickle. Let's see which remaining party member can best handle this situation. Yeah, I'm fucked. Well, rather than suffering the humiliation of getting my team wiped, I simply soft reset the game and grinded up my team's levels to be a bit more suitable to actually challenge the gym. I have some very mixed feelings about grinding, but I will get into that another time. So we challenged Wake a second time, and Flowey was actually able to take on the Gyarados this time, though the Floatzel was still pretty tough. Flowey was able to survive a crunch, the Floatzel got hit by Poison Point, and then I sent in Hamlet to use the same Charm Spam strategy that I used on Gyarados the first time around. I got lucky and avoided an Ice Fang, used Charm a few times, and then let Hamlet get knocked out in order to heal up Flowey and switch him in for free. The Floatzel used Ice Fang, didn't hurt much, and I took it out with Mega Drain. And finally, Wake sends in Quagsire, which is 4 times weak to grass. I feel bad doing this. So at last we defeat Wake, who only has 3 Pokemon for some fucking reason, and receive the Fen badge and the TM for Brine. We leave, Brendan ambushes us right outside of the gym, Wake comes outside for some reason, Brendan tells Wake that Wake is his master, Kinky, and then says that Team Galactic is gonna set off a bomb in the Great Marsh. So we go to investigate, and kaboom! A Team Galactic grunt walks out, says he set off a bomb, and then leaves. Wake goes in to investigate, Brendan stands guard in front of the Great Marsh, and makes me chase after the Galactic grunt. We meet him at the city gate, he tells us not to follow him, so naturally we follow him. We chase him all the way to the lakefront, meet Looker along the way, and then have a quick battle with him. And then he gets away anyway, what was the point of this? We then meet Cynthia again, who tells us about the folklore of Lake Valor, which isn't really folklore, it's more so observable facts. Brendan catches up with us, tells us the explosion in the Great Marsh wasn't really anything serious, leaves, and then Cynthia gives us the Secret Potion, a medicine that'll make those damn Psyduck and Route 210 finally go away. Yeah, remember them? But before I do that, I decided to take a trip through Route 212. Remember that place where I got the Dawnstone a few minutes ago? Yeah, they made a whole route out of it. This place has marsh pits that you can get stuck in. I hate it. Thankfully, the bog disappears when you reach the western part of the route, but still, it isn't really my favorite location overall. I don't know, it just always felt very drab and unfun to me. All it has is rain, bike overpasses, and tall grass everywhere. It's not actually that bad, but for some reason it always feels like a big slog to get through. One good thing came out of this route, though, that being Falco finally evolving into Staraptor. I love Staraptor, it's strong, looks cool, is a great addition to any team, and just the fact that it can learn close combat makes it so unique. The northern part of Route 212 is completely different from the first half. It's a peaceful, sunny area with hedgerows dotting the path. It's still not that interesting, but it's a much nicer atmosphere at least. Of course, this area does have one notable attraction, the Pokemon Mansion. This is a mansion owned by this guy, Mr. Backlot, and it's the only place where you can get a Pokedex registration for Manaphy, a rare legendary Pokemon that can't be obtained through traditional means, but you are nonetheless required to see in order to complete the regional dex. Here you can also take on the 5-Maid Knockout Exact Turn Attack Challenge, in which you attempt to beat 5 trainer maids in a row in a certain number of turns. If you succeed, you get a special gift, which is just another battle with one of these two. So yeah, kinda pointless, but hey, I've played TF2 for 5,000 hours. I'm in no place to judge what you do with your time. The mansion is also home to the Trophy Garden, a small area behind the mansion where you can catch a few Pokemon. Most of them aren't super rare, but Pichu and Pikachu can only be found here. In the post-game, you'll be able to find a much bigger variety of Pokemon that can't be found anywhere else, but of course that's a venture for another day. Anyway, I loop back through Hardhome City, stop in Slaceon Town to pick up some items, I didn't know I had that much money, the amulet coin is overpowered, and at last we can continue through Route 210. After I pick up some milk. So the Psyducks sitting here are apparently suffering from some bad headaches, that seems to be a pretty consistent theme with this poor creature, and the secret potion seems to magically cure them, so we use it, the Psyduck leave, and we're now free to progress forward. But before we do that, Cynthia catches up with us again and gives us an old charm to deliver to her grandma in the next town. And so, with a new plot-related task on our hands, we begin our trek through the northern half of Route 210. You ever not ridden a bike? Yeah, that's basically this area. It's carpeted in extremely tall grass, so we have to get around how God intended for now. There's a few ninja boys that hide in the grass and pop out at you. It's a lot like a pregnancy. You're just enjoying your life, minding your own business, and then boom, child. Always gotta stay on your toes. After that, we have sadism. Remember when I said it wasn't worth it to throw away a move slot just to get rid of fog in the few areas it appears in? Yeah, I lied. This route is long enough that I feel I can justify using defog because it is pure suffering otherwise. I'm sorry, Hamlet. Your sacrifice won't be in vain. So I press on, battle an Ace Trainer, and Pingu evolves! Fuck yeah! My boy's all grown up now. Your starter becoming fully evolved is always a special moment in Pokemon games. It's a lot more fulfilling to watch your child come of age when they don't turn into a gaming YouTuber. It's a great marker of just how far you've come in your adventure. Seeing the full potential of the one party member that's been with you since the very beginning is such a rewarding feeling. It's a sign that you're really in this thing, you're in big boy territory now. I mean, Pingu and I have suffered through 4 whole talk sessions of this game now, that's gotta count for something. Anyway, we move on to the next part of the route. I wonder if we're gonna continue to not ride our bike. Oh my god. You ever ridden a bike over a public safety hazard? Yeah, that's basically this segment. Eventually we reach Celestic Town, and the first thing I do is go underground. My game didn't crash on me this time, so that's a good sign. The underground was probably some cool shit back in the day, being designed heavily around local wireless multiplayer. You could run around with your friends in the same space, make secret bases and decorate them, compete for flags, it was great. See, each secret base had a flag, and you could steal them from other players' bases. If you managed to run it all the way back to your base without another player catching you, you'd increase your flag count, which would give you more space in your base and allow you to place more decorations. You could also set traps to slow down other players, which was the primary way of catching up to people who stole your flag. Traps and flags were bought and sold in exchange for spheres, little trinkets that you could find by digging in the walls. You could even plant them in the ground to grow them into larger spheres, which were required to buy certain items. Also, talking to enough players was the only way to get Spiritomb. And that's pretty much it as far as underground multiplayer goes. It's a little shallow, but it definitely does contribute to the theme of human interaction and connectivity found in Pokemon games. I don't know how widely used this feature was back in the day, but at the very least, I really appreciate the concept. And I've gotta say, talking about it does kinda bring me back to simpler times of playing local wireless Pokemon with my friends on our DS's. Back then, if you wanted to play your favorite games with friends, you couldn't just sit depressed in a Discord call, you had to work for it. Part of it is just my nostalgia goggles talking. Multiplayer is way more simple and convenient nowadays, and it's not like my friends and I used wireless features that much, but there was a certain magic and charm to that time period that I definitely miss a little. Unfortunately, the underground is a bit more abandoned nowadays because of a little thing called "this game is old." Of course I'm playing on an emulator, so I wouldn't be able to use these features anyway, but even if I were playing on the original hardware, the chances are slim to none that I'd find anyone using this feature anymore. The main purpose for the underground nowadays is scavenging for precious resources. You can scan the area around you using the touchscreen to find sparkling spots in the walls. When you interact with them, you get to play this little mining minigame to find mostly spheres and the occasional useful item. I did a bit of digging and found a couple neat things, namely heart scales, a yellow shard, and a rare bone, but even still, most of my spoils were just spheres. Can you imagine going on a mining expedition with your friends and hearing, "Holy shit guys, I found a shape!" I then make a quick stop in Pastoria City to say hi to the move reminder. As I've said before, I'm a big fan of this feature, and now I actually get to use it. I taught Meta Knight Night Slash as I wanted to rework his moveset to be based around physical moves since that's his dominant stat. I really wanted to teach him Leaf Blade too since I just think it's a cool move, but I already have Flowey for grass type coverage so I couldn't justify spending a heart scale on it. I also taught Flowey Giga Drain, which was kinda dumb because Roselia actually learns that move by level up, but it's pre-evolution Budu doesn't, and evidently Flowey didn't evolve into Roselia fast enough so I had to waste a heart scale on it. Giga Drain is a kinda unfortunate move because it's probably the best special attacking grass move Flowey could learn at this point in the game, and yet it only does 60 damage and has 10 PP. Sometimes I stay up late at night pondering the injustice. Anyway, back to Celestic Town. This old lady says there's a guy with a bomb, so naturally I decide to go shopping real quick. I sold the rare bone I dug up underground and found out I was fabulously wealthy, goes to show you the value of carrying the amulet coin around all the time. I then go breaking and entering, learn some stuff about legendary Pokemon, and finally confront the terrorist threat as any child does. The Galactic Grunt goes down easily as usual, and the old lady, aka the town elder, aka Cynthia's grandma, whom we originally came to deliver the old charm to, comes to commend us on our amazing feat of bravery. I give her the old charm like the good courier boy I am, and decide to check out the inside of the ruins. So much going on in here. So the elder starts explaining the cave painting to us when who else but Cyrus walks in. He starts interrogating the poor old lady about the balance of the world or some dumb shit like that, and then threatens to destroy the painting. I guess he really hates cavemen or something. Of course that won't do, so we decide to settle things like gentlemen. This here's our first battle with Cyrus. He's the leader of Team Galactic, so he's gonna be a fairly tough boss to take down. Can you tell I'm just setting up for an anticlimactic moment where I reveal that all he has are 3 not fully evolved Pokemon? Like, wow, way to make him a real threatening villain. Of course I beat him pretty easily, so out of honor and respect for rules and social norms, he decides not to barbarically destroy a cultural artifact. Good on you, Cyrus. He says some stuff about the beings of time and space, and then hightails it out of there. After he leaves, the elder gives us a glimmer of hope. I like Surf, it's got the most utility of any HM by far, and it's a solid 95 power water attack, which makes it not a complete waste of a move slot. I honestly use it as my preferred water move most of the time. So get ready to hang 10, Pingu, because Bubble Beam just isn't cutting it anymore. I then meet Cynthia outside of the ruins. Wait a second. If she was gonna be here anyway, why did she send me to deliver the old charm? Great, another thing to lose sleep over. Anyway, she tells me to head off to Canalave City to check out the library. I guess her only purpose in this game is telling me where to go. Before I do that though, I decide to take a little break from story progression to check out some optional side areas. I love little detours like this in Pokemon games. Just taking time to discover new areas all by yourself really adds to that feeling of adventure. Not only that, but most of the time you'll find some neat Pokemon or items or battles to help level up your team that you aren't gonna see if you just plow straight through the main story. It's really rewarding. All the time I've spent wandering around, scouring the nooks and crannies of various games' regions really helps shape the way I play video games in general. It's made me into something of an explorer. It's why I take 3 hours to get to class every day. Anyway, our first stop is Route 211, immediately to the west of Celestic Town. It's a tiny area with not much going on. I pick some berries, battle some trainers, and then we're back down to Earth. We'll show you Owl best? Well, I don't really give a hoot about your stupid puns. Next up is this area, immediately south of Sandgem Town, that is for some reason 3 separate routes. It's a collection of water routes that were previously inaccessible, but now that I have Surf, I'm able to sail around to my heart's content. An instance of HMs adding more depth to exploration and encouraging you to revisit previous areas, how about that? There really isn't much to find here, but I still enjoy navigating it simply because I don't have to. That's part of the magic of exploration in Pokemon games. It makes it feel like your own adventure. Although I've never been the biggest fan of water routes, there's hardly any distinctive marks of where you are relative to everything else. I always find myself zigzagging around to make sure I didn't miss anything. Not to mention the constant threat of random encounters, unless you spam repels like I do, I suppose. Also, there's just so many trainer battles with the same damn Pokemon. It's a continuous cycle of sending out the same Pokemon with a type advantage to spam the same moves over and over, except when you run out of PP because Giga Drain only has 10 for the love of Christ! Anyway, after that, I walk up into Route 202 and, okay, I'm in the Great Marsh now for some reason. Not sure how that happened. I guess I paused the recording and then just forgot to unpause for a while, but I suppose while I'm here, I might as well spare some thoughts about it. Honestly, Safari Zones in Pokemon kinda suck. In theory, they're kinda neat, a special area where you have to play the game in a slightly modified way in order to nab certain Pokemon. It's like a sort of minigame, and it rewards you with certain rare encounters for putting time and effort into it. But I'm not a big fan of this. Obviously, getting stuck in the mud is more of a this game specific thing, but also more generally, I'm not big on the steps limit, wild Pokemon are erratic and unpredictable, and most of the time the selection of possible wild encounters just isn't worth the trouble. I'm assuming I was looking for a Tropius to serve as an HM Swiss Army knife, and granted, old Banana Brachiosaurus is pretty cool, but I never found one anyway. Apparently the Great Marsh has different wild encounters on different days, and you can look through the binoculars to see which ones are currently available. Yep, seeing no potassium. Next up, we revisit the Orberg Gate from way earlier in the game. This area was almost entirely inaccessible before, save for the main path, but with the power of Rock Smash and Surf, I can finally explore the basement area properly. There's some bike ramps here, because what else do you put in an underground cave? I found the TM for Brick Break, which is pretty nice, and I battled some old guy with a Riolu, but other than that, there isn't much except for a bit that's still inaccessible because I don't have the HM for Strength. Ugh. Next place to revisit is the Ravaged Path, also from fairly early on in our adventure. There's a TM for Water Pulse here, but it requires Surf to get to, and who the hell is going to teach their Pokemon Water Pulse if they already have access to Surf? This river on Route 205 takes us to some fun places. There's an Electorizer and the TM for Thunderbolt by the Valley Windworks, and the Floroma Meadows got a Miracle Seed, a Rare Candy, and a Leaf Stone. There's also one new area to discover, that being the Fuego Ironworks. Fun fact, Fuego means fire in Spanish. I find its inclusion really interesting. The fact that Europe still exists puts a bit of a dystopian spin on the Pokemon universe. There's these spin tiles everywhere, and they're not that annoying. In fact, they add a bit of a unique puzzle aspect to the area, but there'll be the occasional misstep that sends you way back to the beginning and you'll start to regret having hands. After fighting some Steel-type Pokemon, I realized that Meta Knight probably could use a proper Fighting-type move, so I decided to make some use out of the Brick Break TM I found earlier. When the hell did I teach him Swords Dance? I also met this guy, Mr. Fuego, who I can only assume is the leader of the Europeans. He'll give you one shard of each color in exchange for star pieces. Star pieces are helpful for making a quick buck, but I've got a decent amount of cash already at this point, and shards are really helpful for move tutors that'll teach your Pokemon certain moves in exchange for them, so overall I'd say it's a decent bargain. Though I do find it funny that he actually gives you a star piece when you first talk to him and then immediately offers to trade you shards for it. Gotta get the customers hooked somehow, I suppose. I also found the TM for Flamethrower here, though none of my Pokemon can make use of it anyway. A part of me always gets sad when I find a good TM but I'm not able to use it with any of my party members. It feels like I'm wasting it. Like, why have fists if you don't beat the shit out of someone every once in a while? Anyway, after that I lose some more footage and then magically end up in Canalave City. It's a nice place, it's got a bridge and everything. When did I teach Meta Knight Fire Punch? This here is the Harbor Inn, and it's locked. Anyway, I catch up with Brendan again, and we have another battle. Looks like he added a Heracross to his team, but he still hasn't added much of a challenge. After that, we check out the library that Cynthia told me to go to. It's neat, but it shows that the game really doesn't understand its target audience. I'm a gamer, I hate reading. And there doesn't seem to be anything story-related going on here at the moment, so I guess it's off to Iron Island. I meet a guy named Riley, who gives me the HM for Strength. It looks like we're gonna have a companion mission with him. Thank God, I'm super afraid of being alone with Iron. Riley, come back! I guess we're going through the first part of Iron Island all by our lonesome. This is definitely up there in my favorite locations in the game. I always enjoy these dungeon segments in Pokemon games where you're on your own, far removed from Pokemon centers and towns, and you have to fight your way through this long, sprawling area with no convenient safety net except for the items you have on you. They're always a fun challenge and really satisfying to overcome. They also provide some time to just take a break from the story and do some good old-fashioned adventuring uninterrupted, which I always appreciate. Iron Island specifically is where I feel the game's difficulty really starts to ramp up more. There's a much higher volume of trainers here that use evolved Pokemon with levels on par with my own, which makes it an especially fun dungeon to go through. I found the TM for Iron Tail, which I always thought was just the coolest move when I was younger. I think it had to do with Pikachu using it in the anime or something. But looking at it critically now, it's kinda shit. Like, yeah, it's strong, but 75% accuracy just isn't worth it. I just don't have the patience to deal with moves that don't hit all the time. Missing moves, especially on a semi-frequent basis, is annoying at best and catastrophic at worst. Besides, every Pokemon veteran knows that pretty much any move with less than 100 accuracy functionally has 0 accuracy. I'd rather have Iron Head any day. You know it's a sign you're getting old and jaded when you stop liking Iron Tail. I'm just starting to overcome my fear of Element 26 when I finally meet up with Riley, and now that I've mentioned how making a grueling trek through a dungeon on your own is pretty fun, I've kinda realized how much companion trainers take away in a setting like this. Your Pokemon are automatically fully healed after every fight, and half the time your companion's overpowered-ass Pokemon will absolutely carry battles. Where's the challenge in that? There's no medium or long-term consequences for you being reckless in battle and getting your Pokemon weakened or knocked out. In single player, you're at the very least forced to waste potions, but not here. I think companion missions work a little better near the beginning when you aren't flush with cash from abusing the amulet coin and thus don't have access to countless healing items. But by this point in the game, the player usually has a decent amount of money and is capable of amassing a pretty substantial stockpile of potions and revives, so it just isn't nearly as balanced here. Also, as a side note, double battles are so infrequent in the game outside of this setting. I'd love to have a segment where you just face double battle after double battle by yourself. It might make double battles more of a legitimate mechanic with its own strategies and tricks of the trade rather than just an occasional gimmick. Eventually, we encounter some galactic grunts and battle them. It was easy, go figure. Riley offers to give me a Pokemon egg. It's a Riolu, which is a pretty solid Pokemon, but it doesn't really fit my team composition, and I don't have room in my party anyway, so sorry pal, you're stuck with it. In the final room of the area, I find a shiny stone, which means I can finally give Flowey the upgrade he so dearly deserves. Rose Raid at last. We're now another step closer to having a fully grown team. I always love this mid-late-ish point in the game where you start to see all your party members reach their final evolutions. It feels like all the hard work is finally paying off. Next up, I challenged the Canalave City Gym. It's a Steel-type gym, so I just swept all the trainers with Gibby and Meta Knight. The puzzle design of this gym isn't really anything to write home about from an objective standpoint, but I still like traversing it for some reason. Anyway, I quickly make my way to Gym Leader Byron. Fun fact, he's Rourke's dad. I guess when Rock grows up, it becomes a metal alloy. Oh boy, time for my 6th gym battle. Surely I won't sweep him incredibly easily. And we're done. Okay, seriously, why the fuck are gym leaders still having 3 Pokemon at this point? This has been a problem in quite a few Pokemon games. There's 6 slots in a full team, but NPCs never seem to go farther than 50%. What's the thought process here? Why have these boss battle trainers that are in-universe supposed to be some of the toughest in the region be missing half a team? Like, yeah, my rival can have a well-rounded team of 5, but no, giving this guy a Bronzong would be too scary. We last left off having beaten gym leader Byron and getting our 6th gym badge, and no sooner do we step outside the gym than Brendan starts talking to us. He tells us to follow him to the Canalave Library. I was too slow. The Canalave Library is a charming little place that has no purpose other than for one story beat to happen. In all seriousness, I do legitimately like quote-unquote superfluous places like this because they play an important role in helping to build the game's world. I will say though, the Canalave Library specifically isn't really my favorite and has always been kinda forgettable to me. At any rate, we meet up with Dawn and Professor Rowan at the top, and Rowan tasks us to split up and investigate the 3 lakes of Sinnoh that house legendary Mirage Pokemon to help him with his studies of Pokemon evolution. It's pretty cute that Sinnoh thinks it's tough shit for having 3 Great Lakes. We Midwesterners have 5. Rowan gives us each our assignments, and bada bing bada boom, terrorism. Apparently, there was an explosion at Lake Valor, a place I wasn't able to access my first time coming by it, and coincidentally, the lake that I was assigned to investigate. Rowan decides it's still fine to send me off on my own because, man, Lake Verity is just looking really enticing right about now. Man, isn't that so funny? Isn't it so interesting and odd that a kid is going to investigate a disaster zone all by himself? Isn't it so strange that a child is doing dangerous things in this fantasy adventure game about taming magical creatures that's marketed towards children who might want to see themselves doing exciting things in the character they're playing as? Isn't that funny? Aren't I so funny and clever for pointing that out? I bet no one else has made this observation 1,000 fucking times before! Soon enough, we make our way into Lake Valor, which has been completely taken over by Team Galactic, almost like they set off a bomb there or something. There are dying Magikarp everywhere, and this guy here called my home cul-de-sac of Twin Leaf a hick town. Pretty rude, dude. It has a ton of cool rocks and sticks. After just a few battles with some grunts, we enter the cavern and come face to face with Galactic Commander Saturn. I'm gonna be honest, I think it's kinda cute that all the Galactic Commanders are named after planets. It's a fun little thematic touch. What isn't cute, however, is how these bastards don't have any Pokemon. I complained about this last time, so it's not really worth continuing to dwell on, but yeah, Saturn falls victim to the same only 3 Pokemon this far into the game problem that Byron had. Though to his credit, he did actually manage to take out 2 of my Pokemon, which is more than I can say about the other guy. Saturn drops a hint about Lake Verity, so where do you think we're going next? But first I make a quick stop at home to see my mom, because it's nice to say hi every couple of years. After reaching the lake, we discover that, surprise surprise, Team Galactic has taken over the lake and is attempting to capture the legendary Pokemon. We battle a few more Galactic Grunts, of course, but interestingly, they're actually fought in double battles here. As I've said, I think the game would benefit from having more double battle-centric segments, so this is a fun thing to experience, if only for a fleeting moment. Of course, the battles with the Grunts mainly serve as a warm-up for another battle with Commander Mars. Dawn sucks at battling, so it's up to me to save the day, and yeah, she's only got 3 Pokemon too. I don't have much to say about this fight. After defeating Mars, we find out that Team Galactic has in fact already captured the legendary Pokemon from all 3 lakes, but we also sent Brendan out into the tundra by himself, so we might want to check up on him. This leads us into the third and most daunting challenge of this lake battle saga, Lake Acuity. This lake is way out at the very north of the region, and we have to trudge all the way through Mount Coronet and routes 216 and 217 to get there. It requires the use of strength, so I had to temporarily swap out Flowey and replace him with Disaster. God damn you HMs. One part of Mount Coronet we have to travel through is this basement area that has a small lake and is covered by fog. This one little room has always been weirdly memorable to me. I honestly have no idea why. I guess just because the lake and the fog give it slightly more distinguishing features compared to the rest of Mount Coronet, but even still, it's so strange that this one room with not much going on and it sticks out so much in my mind when I think about this game and its map. It's kind of fun what sorts of random things in this game can leave such a lasting impression like that. Pretty soon, we exit Mount Coronet and enter Route 216. It's our first major snowy area of the game, which means it looks pretty cool but plays pretty dumb. Hail is active in battles here at all times, which means any Pokemon that aren't Ice-type are taking damage every single turn. On the bright side, speaking of Ice-type Pokemon, it's here that I find my 6th and final new member of my party, Sneasel. I caught him in a quick ball, named him Weezer, he got owned by an NPC because he was underleveled, it was a fun time. So naturally, I turned to the tried and true RPG activity for when a party member is underleveled, grinding. I used EXP cheats and fast-forwarded the game to expedite the process, and to be honest, I don't really feel bad about it. Yeah, this isn't how the game is supposed to be played, but I've been a good boy for most of this playthrough, and grinding is a miserable and incredibly boring process. I will say, though, that grinding can be very tricky to avoid in RPGs. There's no perfect way to design difficulty. Everyone plays the game at different paces, different styles, and different skill levels, and what works as a good, fair difficulty curve for one player might not work for another. That problem could be partially alleviated by difficulty settings, but Pokemon has always avoided those like the plague for some reason. I'd also add that there is some satisfaction to be found in grinding. Getting your shit wrecked and being forced to actually put in the time and effort to better your team and then coming back stronger to overcome obstacles can be really rewarding. But even still, any feelings of satisfaction you may gain aren't really worth the suffering that it takes to get them, so as long as I have the option to speed up the process, I'm gonna do it. Though for what it's worth, I think the level curve of this game is pretty good overall. I wouldn't really say that it's hard, but it's hard enough that I'm still able to have a fun time with it even as a pretty experienced player. And grinding has been necessary so infrequently in my adventure so far that it's not as big of a problem as it could be. Yes, Johto Games, I am looking at you. Anyway, we continue trudging through Route 216 and make a quick stop at a rest house. I've always liked these sorts of places. They're a helpful utility for longer, more difficult routes as they let you fully heal your Pokemon without using items or having to run all the way back to the Pokemon Center. At the same time, you can't access your PC or buy items or anything like that, so you're still outside the comfort of civilization. Basically, I like them because they provide small moments of peace without disrupting the pacing or the atmosphere of whatever location you're exploring. Soon enough, we move out of Route 216 and into Route 217, where we have a quick little chat with Gym Leader Maylene. She tells us she's hiking through a blizzard in bare feet and gym clothes, so it's probably the last time I'll ever talk to her. This is a nice moment because it's completely superfluous. It's not plot relevant, it doesn't tell you to do anything, it's just a brief encounter with a character from earlier in the game, which I think helps to make the character seem more human and develop the world in a tiny way. One thing that's always struck me as kinda odd though is how this whole segment is split into two routes, 216 and 217. It seems completely pointless, they're perfectly contiguous with each other and they're near identical thematically. Something I notice is that when you enter Route 217, the snowfall visual effect changes to be much more intense, so it's possible that they had to make them two separate routes in order to have different weather effects. But that only applies in this particular instance. Pokemon games split up routes a lot, even when there doesn't seem to be any reason for it. The most notable example that comes to mind is the water route from last time that was split into 3 parts when it could have very easily just been 1. It's not an issue that affects gameplay or anything, I just always thought it was kinda weird. Anyway, Route 217, it's a lot like your average Wisconsin in January. There's snow everywhere and I wanna die. This entire route is covered in deep snow that takes ages to walk through, and there are a few small patches of tiles that slow you down even more. Even when putting the game in fast forward mode, I'm barely moving quicker than a walk. Your screen is also covered with this insane blizzard effect, and so much of the route is completely open snow, which means that if you want to make sure you explore the area thoroughly, you're going to be zigzagging around with no sense of direction at a snail's pace. Also, there's a random house with a person that talks weird and gives you an item that increases the power of ghost-type moves. Huh. It is one of, if not the most grueling locations to navigate in the game. And it's not even because the level design is particularly tricky or because the trainers are particularly strong, there's just fucking snow everywhere. One thing that I will give to it though is that because of how nightmarish it is always incredibly satisfying when you finally reach the end of it, no matter how many times you play through this game. And it's just a really unique area in terms of both theming and design. There's really nothing else like it in the region. I guess overall, and this might totally just be my nostalgia talking, even though it is kinda dumb and bullshit, it doesn't piss me off that much, and it does have that bit of morbid charm that comes with difficult and annoying levels in a lot of other games. Also, I found the HM for Rock Climb here, definitely one of the weirder HMs to find in this game with it just being in the middle of nowhere, but hey, I got it. Anyway, we eventually reach the Acuity Lakefront where we find Brendan still alive and well. Evidently, he was just standing there waiting for me the whole time, as when he leaves, he says, "Team Galactic, I'm coming for you," implying that he's only just now going to confront them. And he has the nerve to call me slow. Importantly though, he correctly points out that I need the gym badge from the next city to be able to use rock climb and scale the hill that leads to Lake Acuity. And so with that, we have our next objective to complete while he's fighting Team Galactic, and we finally enter Snow Point City. I like this place, it's got a very calming atmosphere and aesthetics. One dumb thing about it though is that it still has those special snow tiles that slow you down in a couple places. They're not a huge problem for navigating overall, but there's still a small annoyance that I think was pretty unnecessary considering we're in a town and not a route. In a bit of good news, we've reached another Pokemon Center, which means Flowey finally gets to rejoin the team. Good thing we're in an area full of Ice-type Pokemon that can one-shot him. This city is also home to one of the most notorious criminals in Pokemon history. See, this conniving scoundrel right here offers to trade you a Haunter for a Medicham. Seems like an okay enough offer, neither of those Pokemon are super valuable, but then you realize Haunter evolves into Gengar after being traded. So hey, that's actually a pretty sweet deal, a good way to fill out your Pokedex or even get a cool new party member if you don't have any friends to trade with or you're playing on an emulator like some sort of literal scum. But then, in one of the most brazen and depraved acts of cruelty ever committed, the Haunter that the NPC trades you has an Everstone, an item which prevents the Pokemon holding it from evolving. So not only have you lost a Medicham for nothing, you've lost your dignity. And she has the nerve to laugh in your face about it afterwards. Mindy, you treacherous swindler! If Sinnoh had a police force, you'd be done for. Beyond that, this town has a place where you can trade this guy shards for teaching your Pokemon certain moves. None of the ones offered here really caught my eye, but there was this guy who says bone density is a very trendy thing to say, and you know, I've gotta hand it to him, I have been hearing that a lot recently. I better start drinking more milk. There's also this big old temple here, but I can't enter because apparently I'm not one of the chosen ones, so it's off to the gym. The gym in this town, fittingly enough, is an ice-type gym. You have to slide around on the ice and get enough momentum to break the snowballs in order to get through. In my opinion, it's definitely one of the better gym puzzles in this game, if not the best, as it does require you to actually use your brain in order to beat it. And I recall it actually gave me a pretty hard time when I first played this game as a kid. As far as the battles though, they didn't give me too much trouble. Meta Knight was able to sweep pretty much everyone. Anyone else noticing a pattern of me being able to wreck a gym with just one Pokemon because everyone uses a single type? Anyway, the gym leader here is Candace. As in Candace stick in your mouth. Woo! Like most of the trainers in this gym, she didn't put up too much of a fight, except for her Frostlass, because it kept spamming double team and Meta Knight was weak to Shadow Ball, which forced me to send in Weezer to finish the job. After taking out the Frostlass, I cleaned up the rest of her team and received the Icicle badge and the TM for Avalanche. Something I've realized throughout this game is that even though I think gym leaders giving you TMs is a fun thing to include, the ones that they give you are always pretty mediocre and not really stuff I would actually consider putting on my team. They're not really bad, and in fact some of them are quite good, Shadow Claw from Fantina and Flash Cannon from Byron for example, but half the time they don't really feel like fun bonus rewards, it's just, welp, here's Stealth Rock. At any rate, having the gym badge finally allows us to use the HM Rock Climb so I can finally meet up with our rival at Lake Acuity. So I condemn Gibby to Everlasting Torment, climb up the hill, enter the lake, and my rival lost to the Galactic Commander. You've got to be fucking joking. Yep, our good old pal Brendan somehow managed to lose a battle against Jupiter, which, like, that just doesn't make any sense. These Galactic Commanders are a joke, and he's got a strong, well-rounded team. Even thematically, like, even if he's not quite as strong as me, the main character, he's clearly been built up to be a fairly strong trainer by this point in the story. So having this happen randomly is just weird. It's not like it was really necessary in the story. It's not like Jupiter is or is ever even made out to be a particularly fearsome opponent, so I kinda doubt it was meant to hype up battling her or something. I guess you might say it's for the rival's story arc of trying to become the best or something like that, but it's not like he's been insanely cocky about it up to this point. Yeah, he's confident, but he's never come off as particularly delusional or in need of some wake-up call. And in fact, his only takeaway from this event is, I gotta work hard to get stronger, which is basically what he's been saying throughout the whole game. Even if you really wanted to include something like this, you could have easily just had him battle like a gym leader or another important character or something, not goofy-ass Team Galactic. The only thing that happens here anyways is she laughs in his face, which he honestly deserves for losing to someone who presumably just has 3 mid-tier unevolved Pokemon, and then leaves. He could have won the battle against her and everything would be the exact same. I don't even get to battle her to avenge him, she just leaves. I guess it makes sense because it doesn't really matter whether you beat her or not, they're still gonna take the legendary Pokemon, but now come to think of it, all of those commander battles were pointless. What the hell is this story arc? Actually, I take that back because it would have been pretty boring and contrived to skip those encounters and just have Team Galactic suddenly in possession of the legendary Pokemon with no build-up, and you need to make sure you have semi-frequent contact with them throughout the story to see what they're up to, but main idea, the rival losing to Jupiter is just dumb. If it sounds like I'm making overly harsh nitpicks for no reason, Well, I am, but I think it's still worth discussing and critiquing the decisions made with the story rather than just writing it off as, well, it's Pokemon, nothing matters, lol. Anyway, I should probably note that after crushing all of our rivals' hopes and dreams, Jupiter feels the need to tell us, hey, definitely don't come to our headquarters in Veilstone City, there's definitely nothing important going on there. And so, of course, after exploring the lake for a bit, we set our sights on the next location to take on in the next part of our adventure. One thing that I think this game does fairly well is the backtracking. The Galactic HQ in Veilstone City is partially accessible when you first visit it, but as you might expect, the vast majority of it is still completely closed off. It's nice to be able to return to these previously visited locations and explore them in a completely new light, just being able to go back somewhere and be like, oh yeah, that place, so that's why it exists. It's just fun to revisit old places and remember what it was like when you first explored them, and I think it's done well in this game, both by unlocking things as part of the story, as seen here, and as annoying as they otherwise are, HMs also really help add to the fun of revisiting old locations in new ways. Upon flying to Veilstone City, I decided to pay a little visit to the department store and buy the TM for Thunder. Why did I do that? Anyway, I head to the Galactic HQ and I find this random grunt here whose life and career I apparently ruined. See, personally, I like making people's lives worse, so this was a really touching moment. We meet up with Looker again, who wants us to head into the Galactic warehouse and sneak into their hideout that way. This is the part of the game where the evil team really takes center stage. It happens in pretty much every Pokemon game when your quest to discover these fun magical creatures and become the very best comes to a halt and you have to stop Armageddon. Anything for the resume. I actually quite enjoy these segments when they happen in each game. It makes for a nice change of pace compared to how the rest of the adventure operates. The general flow of gameplay is a bit more uncertain in terms of how the locations are laid out and what you have to do and who you're going to battle next, and it makes the story just a bit more engaging with a bit of rising tension and some added weight to your actions. The villainous teams play a crucial role in giving the game actual stakes. Sure, there are stakes to the main quest of beating the Pokemon League and all, but the villainous teams provide a force that is actively working against you, like there's something bad that'll happen if you fail rather than just, you don't beat the Pokemon League. It's like if someone says, do this thing and I'll give you a piece of candy, and then later on they tell you, also if you fail, I'll punch you in the face. Like, yeah, I still want the candy, but now I'm working with a purpose. The main gimmick of the Galactic HQ is these warp panels. I mean, they're just doors if you think about it. One thing that I've always found interesting about these Team Galactic segments is that there's always one singular scientist trainer with 1 or 2 psychic types. Like, this is what you're doing with your degree? They're the closest thing we really get to having multiple varieties of galactic grunts in this game, so they're a neat little addition. Investing in STEM seems all well and good until one of your graduates gets a Kadabra. So after making my way through the warehouse area, I find the Galactic Key lying on the ground, which lets me finally access the remainder of the Galactic HQ through the main entrance. I battle some more galactic grunts. That's about it. Who was reading mythology during their lunch break? I do think it's fun when the game includes these little lore bits in random optional places. It's just another neat way of rewarding exploration and going off the beaten path. Anyway, I meet up with Looker again and we listen in on Cyrus giving a speech where he talks about how the world is incomplete and they need to make a new one and all that typical villainy stuff. He's only 27. Dude, did you even try to have a normal career? Looker and I part ways, and nap time. I actually really love this little bed area, 1 because it's just a legitimately helpful break point where you can heal up your team, and 2 because I think it's just funny to have these 2 beds sitting here in a random spot in a villainous hideout. Ensure the bed is unoccupied before getting into it. Man, no one is getting laid in this facility. That's how you know they're really evil. Anyway, we make our way through the rest of the hideout and eventually come face to face with Cyrus. Well, you can't just lie like that, that's evil! Yes, he reveals that the new world he actually wants to create will not be for Team Galactic, but rather completely for himself and himself only. He's probably just an introvert. See, Cyrus is an interesting character because he's a complete and utter sociopath who is unable to comprehend human emotion, and he also still has just 3 Pokemon that aren't very strong, so the second battle with him isn't very remarkable. He makes up for it though by at long last giving us the Master Ball. Getting the Master Ball is another one of those staple milestone moments in Pokemon games, when you know you're really making progress and nearing the climax of the story. After all the hard work and dedication, finally you get to say, the Master of Balls, that's me, bitches. The Master Ball is guaranteed to capture any Pokemon you throw it at. It's clearly intended to be used on the game's main legendary Pokemon, because those fellas are tough to catch by normal means, and considering they're usually mandatory encounters, not everyone wants to spend their time and effort doing that when they could just catch it immediately. It ultimately comes down to personal preference whether to use it or not, but it's nice to have it as an option, and at the very least it does have a decent amount of symbolic value in the story. Crucially, Cyrus also tells us that he's going to Mount Cornet. Well, who the hell is Cornet? We press on into the lab where we find a bunch of weird test tube looking things. There is something sus...
Where?
Oh, there is something suspended in a green fluid. Is that Nickelodeon slime? Okay, so the real point of interest here is this room where we find another underwhelming battle with Commander Saturn. And we also see the 3 Lake Guardian legendaries, Yuxi, Mesprit, and Azelf, apparently in pain stuck inside these machines. After beating Saturn, we're able to set them free, whereupon we find out that Team Galactic crafted a so-called red chain using the 3 legendaries. They ripped the fucking organs out of their heads. This is shockingly grim for a Pokemon game. Yeah, there's always references and vague allusions to disturbing dark concepts in the series, like, oh my god guys, Pokemon can die, aren't these games dark? But here it's just such a clear, visceral image. There's no getting around it. Team Galactic's experiment was ripping these gems out of these Pokemon's heads to make a magical MacGuffin. It's something that I don't think I ever really quite noticed when button mashing through text in previous playthroughs, but definitely noticed this time, and it's pretty damn off-putting. At any rate, I now have a new objective, Mount Cornet. The mountain called Cornet. And while I do that, I also need to get Weezer's stupid ass to finally evolve. Generation 4 introduced a bunch of new evolutions for old Pokemon, and while I think that's really great in concept, the way it was implemented just feels so strange. Because right alongside these new Pokemon, they also introduced some of the wackiest ass evolution methods ever seen in the series. It seems like this was done to maintain continuity with old games where these evolutions didn't exist. For example, you could say that the reason you couldn't evolve Magmar into Magmortar in generations 1 through 3 wasn't because Magmortar wasn't created yet, it was because there was no Magmarizer in those games. Now in theory, I think it's a nice idea to make an effort to maintain continuity as things get added and changed between games, but in practice, I think it's annoying. To my knowledge, there's no actual in-game information that tells you or even gives you any hints as to how the hell to evolve these Pokemon. Yes, you can argue that some of them are somewhat self-explanatory, but don't try to tell me that there's some obvious connection between the rhino and the outline of a house. Not only that, but they just feel really inaccessible in a lot of cases. For example, Weezer needs to level up at night while holding the Razor Claw to evolve, and where is the first place in the game that I can get a Razor Claw? A hidden item in the Galactic HQ. There's hardly even hidden items in buildings in general, let alone buildings that are meant to be staging grounds for the story. If I didn't know from looking it up beforehand that it was there, I would have never thought to whip out the dowsing machine in the middle of a critical story segment. And if I didn't do that, the next place I'd be able to get a Razor Claw is in Victory Road at the end of the damn game. And this is probably one of the less egregious cases because at least you don't get Sneasel until pretty late in the game to begin with. But take Glaceon, for example. You can get one by leveling up an Eevee by this icy rock right before the 7th gym. The only place to get an Eevee is from this one NPC right before the 3rd gym. So you have to either A, keep the Eevee on your team throughout most of the main adventure to make sure it stays leveled up, which is going to be really annoying because Eevee is dogshit in battle, or B, leave the Eevee in your box and put it on your team when you can actually evolve it. And now you have a level 20 Glaceon that you need to waste hours of your life grinding up because most Pokemon you battle are level 40 at this point. So basically, if you want to have a Glaceon on your team in the main adventure, no you fucking don't. Look, for the most part, obtaining these new evolutions isn't that bad if you know what you're doing, but I just think it's so bizarre how they're actually handled in the game. Like, were they just counting on us to have Bulbapedia on standby? I just feel like they should have made them a little less convoluted to obtain so that more players would be able to appreciate them. Well, at the very least, I'll be able to appreciate Weezer's evolution pretty soon because here we begin the trek through Mount Cornet. This has to be one of my favorite segments in the entire game. It's just so perfectly atmospheric. The harsh, intense weather on the outside and the empty darkness of the caves on the inside delivers such a strong sense of isolation. And the act of scaling a mountain while fighting through galactic grunt battles contributes a heavy sense of challenge and danger. And it's true to the situation in the story, you really are going it alone to confront a dangerous enemy, and the setting just fits it so well. The music adds so much to it too. It gives you this feeling of rising tension and fear while simultaneously giving a feeling of contemplation, like you're looking back on something from the past and pondering life. And I think that really fits this moment in the story. This Team Galactic confrontation really is the culmination of everything you've done on your adventure up to this point, so the combination of tension and contemplation works really well. I enjoy a lot of video game music, and it's always vitally important for setting the mood, but I don't think any song I've ever heard sells the atmosphere quite like the Mount Cornet music. This whole segment is just masterfully done. It's just so compelling on a raw, emotional level, which makes it so memorable and so enjoyable to play through. And yeah, Weezer finally evolves into Weavile here. It's always a nice feeling to get that much closer to finally rounding out your team with fully evolved Pokemon. And especially with it happening during a pivotal story segment, it really adds to that feeling of, man, look how far I've come. Anyway, we eventually make it all the way to the top and reach the Spear Pillar, which is another one of my favorite places in the game. Much like Mount Coronet proper, it has such a compelling visual design and a great music track that makes it feel so intense and climactic. And I think this big final confrontation with Team Galactic is orchestrated pretty well and really ties together with the atmosphere of the area. It starts off with a double battle with Jupiter and Mars where our rival rushes in at the last second to save the day. I really like this moment because your rival at the end of the day is your friend, and getting to fight alongside someone whom you've interacted with so much throughout the story and who had previously always been your opponent, I don't know, it's just nice. And it's made all the better by the fact that this moment is told through the gameplay itself rather than just through dialogue, by actually fighting a battle alongside your rival rather than just, I don't know, he just shows up and gives you something, or say, battles one of the commanders for you so you only have to fight one or something. You actually really feel like your rival is helping you, the player, because you can see it happening with your own eyes. I just think there's something kinda sentimental about this moment, which makes this segment of the story more fun and more memorable. Except right after the battle, he just heals your party and runs away, so I don't really know what his deal is. Anyway, after your rival leaves, Cyrus prepares to birth a new world with the power of his red chain, two red chains, one made with organs and one made with cloned organs. Then cue this absolutely whack-ass cutscene and wait guys, watch this. So, Cyrus summons Dialga and Palkia, the legendary Pokemon of time and space, and for some reason his text boxes are weird, which just makes the Lake Guardians fucking pissed. They have regrown their organs and are now here to save the day, but unfortunately their power isn't enough to stop the combined power of both Dialga and Palkia. What the hell is that? A mysterious shadowy Pokemon appears out of the ground, jump scares us, and creates this wormhole looking thing. Cynthia finally shows up and tells us of a myth she uncovered of a legendary Pokemon that comes from another world. Oh, you think? And thus we commence arguably the most unique and memorable area of this entire game, the Distortion World. The Distortion World is really Pokemon Platinum's flagship location. It's the only fully new area introduced in this game that wasn't in Diamond and Pearl, and there really isn't anything like it in any other Pokemon game before or after Platinum. Like, are you seeing this shit? There's wacky floating platforms you have to jump between, platforms that move around in all directions, platforms and obstacles that appear and disappear. You get to walk on walls at 90-degree angles and surf downwards on an upward-facing waterfall. Without the waterfall, HM? And all the while, everything is tied together by the constant sightings of the mysterious shadow Pokemon, the eerie, foreboding background music, and an infinite spiraling dark void. It's just so utterly surreal, and truly one of the most creative locations in the series by far. Now, as for what you actually do in here, well, you do what everyone does when they're in the void. Solve puzzles. You have to push these strength boulders around into the pits that the Lake Guardian legendaries indicate. It's kinda random, but it is still a pretty neat puzzle, making you have to think about how to navigate the boulders and yourself through multiple layers of wacky terrain. Soon enough after doing that, we go with Cynthia deeper down into the world to meet Cyrus for one final battle. This is one of my favorite battles in the entire game because Cyrus finally has an actual team. He now has 5 fully evolved Pokemon, and they're all actually pretty tough to beat. Like, Christ, how'd you one-shot Falco with a flamethrower? This battle was so tough for me as a kid, and thus left a pretty lasting impression on me, and it was still a legitimate challenge this time around, even with all my Pokemon experience and a pretty well-rounded team. The Pokemon of his that gave me the most trouble as a kid by far was his Gyarados, and this time, it still lived up to the hype. This thing was a bitch to take down. I had to sack my entire team to stall it out with healing items and paralysis RNG, because I am a skilled player who knows how to win in a fair fight. At any rate, I was eventually able to beat it and have Pingu land the finishing blow in his Crobat to finally win the battle. I don't know if it's just a me thing, but during major battles in Pokemon games, I usually try to make it so my starter is the one to defeat the boss's final Pokemon. I don't know, I just think there's something sort of poetic about it, like, yeah, you are the OG and you're gonna be the one to end this. Another thing I like to do is try to have every member of my party participate in the battle, preferably with each one defeating one of the opponent's Pokemon. It wasn't exactly 1-to-1 in this battle, but every member of my party did make an appearance and contributed in some way to ultimately winning. I think that just speaks to the magic of Pokemon. The fact that I feel such an attachment to these virtual creatures that I'll go out of my way to make sure they all get a chance in the spotlight just shows that the games are pretty damn good at making the player feel a genuine bond with their Pokemon. Or I'm just a fucking weirdo. So with Cyrus defeated, there remains only one thing left to do. Battle Giratina. When I first played through this game, I opted to use the Master Ball right away. It's clean and efficient, and I think it is somewhat fitting to use the Master Ball on the game's main legendary. But this time around, I decided to try and capture it through conventional means. I just really enjoy the challenge of trying to capture legendaries that way, and to be honest, I'll always have that part of my brain that's like, well, what if I need the Master Ball later? I could catch every damn Pokemon in the game and I'd still be like, well, what if the Among Us character actually is in this game? At any rate, I eventually captured Giratina and name it Giratina. Has anyone noticed that every Pokemon's name is capitalized in this game? Cynthia and I have one final interaction with Cyrus where he rages at his failure to make the world without spirit that he so desired, and we emerge triumphant in the send-off spring. I really like this place, it's just so peaceful and upbeat, which is a refreshing and frankly rewarding change of atmosphere after a pretty tense segment of the story. But it also brings back some bad memories. That's right, story time is back! So when I first played through this game, I found a wild bee barrel in this area and it had this weird sparkle animation play when it appeared. I had a feeling it was something kinda special, so I tried to catch it, but after a few balls it just refused to get caught, so I gave up and ran from it. All these years later, I now realize that that was a shiny Pokemon, which are extremely rare and generally incredibly exciting to encounter whether you're hunting for one or just playing the game casually. Although I had a feeling that that bee barrel was unique somehow, it didn't seem quite unique enough for me to spend a bunch of time and effort trying to catch it, because it wasn't really clear what the sparkle animation meant, and so I didn't really understand how it was unique. So yes, like an idiot, I willingly ran from a shiny Pokemon. Well, maybe if they made it look any different from a normal bee barrel, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Fuck you. I don't understand these shiny Pokemon that barely look any different from the normal version of that Pokemon. The whole point of shinies is to be a wacky, alternate color palette version of a Pokemon to provide you with something a little more unique. It adds to the variety of Pokemon games by being such a rare event, as it makes for an exciting moment that'll always stick out in your memories of your experience with the game. But then some of these Pokemon just got the shortest possible end of the stick. Like, wow, I wonder what my Gibby would look like if he were shiny. Well, yippee-ki-yay! At any rate, we head back to Sandgem Town at Cynthia's urging and finally reunite with Professor Rowan and Dawn. It's a fun little full circle moment. After all you've done in your adventure, returning to the place where it all began and thinking about how far you've come since you last visited, it's nice. And it's here that Professor Rowan gives us one final mission. Get our final gym badge at the Sunny Shore City Gym and beat the Pokemon League. The end is in sight, fellas. We last left off with a mission to conquer the final gym and challenge the Pokemon League, and the first stop on our way is the Great Marsh where I catch a Tropius and name it Bananarama. This is a surprise tool that'll help us later. Next up is a merry jaunt through Route 222. This is an enjoyable route because it's fairly simple and straightforward, and I think that provides a sense of relief and relaxation after all the big boy story stuff that just went down. The downside of it being so simple and straightforward is that that's all I have to say about it. On to Sunny Shore City. When we first arrive, we have a brief encounter with Flint, one of the Elite Four, who tells us that the city's gym leader Volkner is bored as hell because everyone sucks at battling, and so therefore it's up to me to be a worthy opponent who will make him enjoy battling again. I think this is a neat little setup. It's totally superfluous, but it's good to portray the major characters of the game as characters rather than just another totally nondescript empty shell that you battle once and never see again. It just adds a tiny bit more depth to Volkner and Flint as characters, which is helpful for building the game's world and making the characters a bit more memorable, especially in Flint's case because Elite Four in particular tend to suffer heavily from a lack of identity and character development. Sunny Shore City as a whole is a fun little place. It's got cheery upbeat music, and the futuristic solar panel walkways and the ocean water surrounding everything makes for an interesting and unique aesthetic. There's a lighthouse here which you have to visit in order to see Volkner, where he gives you the same spiel that you already heard and then leaves to go back to the gym. You can also look through the binoculars to see the Pokemon League, which is a pretty cool detail. Interestingly enough, here you can also meet Jasmine, who is a gym leader in the Johto games, and like Volkner is from a seaside city with a lighthouse that you have to meet her in order to actually battle her. It's a neat little cameo appearance, and some have argued that it was actually a hint at Heart Gold and Soul Silver remakes of the Gen 2 Johto games that would release just 1 year after Platinum. There's actually quite a few references to Johto in Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum, which many people took to be hints at a remake back then. Whether they were actually intended to be hints is of course debatable, but it's certainly possible given that remakes did indeed happen, and either way, it's interesting to think about. Sunny Shore City is also home to a seal shop, which is nice because the ball capsule feature is really fun and a nice way to personalize your experience with the game. My only problem with it, why here? Why would you put this in literally one of the last places you visit during your adventure? I would think that it'd be better to provide more options earlier on so that players can customize and change up their ball capsule compositions throughout the game. But doing it literally at the 8th gym? Sure, I'd rather have it than not, but it's like, wow, thanks for giving me all these options to personalize my experience for the final 8th of the game after making me spend most of the game without them. It just makes the seals lose some of their value, which is a damn shame because they're such a fun and unique aspect of the game that I would have loved to indulge in more throughout the adventure. Well, at the very least, I'll be able to appreciate my ball capsules now because it's time to take on the 8th and final gym. This is an electric type gym where you have to walk around on these rotating platforms to navigate your way to the end. The battles here were a little lackluster because I just had Gibby spam Earthquake over and over without much trouble, but the gym puzzle itself was pretty fun, definitely up there as one of the better gym puzzles in this game. Honestly, I'd say this game overall really delivers on the gym puzzles. Platinum Selection just in general is one of the better sets of gym puzzles in the series. There are some that I think could be a little better, and of course Orberg Gym, like come on, that doesn't even count. But there weren't any that I actually disliked, and there are some really legitimately fun ones here, like this one in Sunnyshore. Anyway, it's time for the last gym battle of the game. Ultimately, it's a little underwhelming because Gibby, being a ground type with Earthquake, is just too good for any of these electric types to pose much of a threat. Okay, the Jolteon got a lucky crit with Iron Tail, but that's fine, I'll just revive him, no problem. Okay, the Luxray knows Ice Fang. Well, it wasn't a complete walk in the park, but it ultimately wasn't anything too crazy, so at long last, I'm able to get the Beacon Badge, the 8th and final gym badge of the game, which means I'm finally qualified to take on the Pokemon League. Right on the shore, I have a conversation with my rival where he says he's gonna catch up to me and beat me in no time, and Jasmine, so enchanted by our friendship, gives me the final HM of this game. Waterfall, aka another useless ass move that I have to waste one of Pingu's move slots on. And then it's time for another water route. Delightful. Route 223 is definitely up there on my stupid ass route list. There's nothing like super egregious about it, it's just another generic water route where I have to use the same damn Pokemon and spam the same damn moves over and over. I also find it annoying how damn wide it is because it means I constantly have to zigzag back and forth to make sure that I can see and explore everything. It's just really forgettable and unfun to play through. But at the end of the route, you get to scale this waterfall, and if you forget that you had to waste a move slot on it, it's kinda neat because 1, it looks cool, and 2, I think waterfalls make for a nice visual symbol of progress and triumph. This little area is technically part of the Pokemon League, but its main purpose is just to have a Pokemon Center so that you can easily fly to and from Victory Road and be able to enter it with a freshly healed party. It's quite helpful because if I had to constantly go through Route 223 to get back to Victory Road, I just don't know if I could handle that mentally. Well, at long last, it's finally time for us to take on Victory Road. The Victory Road is a staple of pretty much every Pokemon game, serving as one final test of your abilities in the lead up to the Pokemon League. It's kinda like the ultimate route. You have to fight your way through a bunch of strong trainers and wild Pokemon on a long, winding path. The Victory Road in Platinum in particular is a lot of fun, having plenty of strong trainers with a wide variety of Pokemon, a unique and challenging layout, and plenty of opportunities for exploration off the beaten path. It's also here that, after all this time, Gibby finally reaches level 48 and evolves into Garchomp. This marks the final evolution of the game, and I think having it happen here contributes to the feeling of, oh man, we're really at the end of the road now. Getting your final fully evolved Pokemon is really satisfying, but there's also something kind of bittersweet about it because there's just one less thing that you have to work towards. After this point, your team becomes pretty static, not only in what Pokemon are on it, but also most of the time your Pokemon's movesets are final or close to final. It just takes away a bit of that freshness and variety from the experience because your team isn't dynamic anymore. It's gonna stay pretty much the exact way that it is for the rest of the time that you play the game. That being said, it's still fun to finally have your team be complete and toughened up, and I mean, it's sort of inevitable anyway. It's bound to happen at some point in the adventure. Also, remember when I said I liked Victory Road in this game? Well, as it turns out, it requires you to have the Rock Smash HM to complete it. Remember that, Tropius? Yeah, I decided to just swap out Flowey for Bananarama for the duration of Victory Road because I will do a lot of things, but I will be damned if I have to teach a main member of my party fucking Rock Smash. Well, besides that issue, Victory Road is still generally pretty fun, and before we know it, we make it to the other side and scale yet another waterfall to finally reach the Pokemon League. It's really an amazing feeling to finally reach the Pokemon League in each game because now you know you're really at the end. And the Sinnoh Pokemon League is really cool. Despite it being the lead up to the finale of the game, it has such a peaceful atmosphere. It has a really calming and serene music track that brings on a sense of reflection, like just pausing to take it all in and be like, wow, after all this time, I'm finally here, look how far I've come. I know I've touched on this idea before, but the Pokemon League's atmosphere of peaceful reflection fits this part of the game well and serves to make the location more memorable and emotionally resonant. And even though it has this atmosphere of peace and serenity, the Pokemon League still looks the part as being the big final challenge of the game. The waterfall and the statues and the castle-esque structure make for a really cool aesthetic and give it a sort of epic feeling. And hey, you see that cliff? Wouldn't it be funny if I hung something off it? I first started recording this current playthrough on my 18th birthday in the spring of 2020. Yeah, that's a fitting way to enter adulthood, being sad and alone. Yes, rather than living it up in my final days of high school and making the most of my rapidly vanishing youth, I was busy hiding from the apocalypse. Some of you might remember that there was a global pandemic caused by a novel coronavirus that got pretty bad right around this time, and right before it hit I was sort of in the headspace of, man, I'm getting old, I want to make the most of this unique time in my life before I move on to a new phase in my life where I can experience a lot of this stuff again. And the forces of the universe just so perfectly aligned to tell me to go fuck myself. I'll preface this by saying that yes, I'm well aware that it is certainly a massive privilege to be like, the pandemic was awful, I didn't get to go to prom. But it still was a really frustrating time for me, in part because of the stuff I was missing out on. I feel like most of the time you'd expect the story to go something like, man, I miss the good old days of my youth, I really regret not making the most of my time back then. But for me, I knew that they were the good old days, and I really was making a conscious effort to try and make the most of this unique time in my life. But then as the pandemic hit, I literally wasn't able to do any of it anymore. So instead of me choosing not to make the most of my time and later regretting it, I didn't make the most of my time because I was forcibly prevented from doing so. And it just results in me being left with this bitter feeling of, what could have been. Now, I'm not saying that the pandemic is the full cause of that feeling. I probably would have felt something similar even if life had been normal, and quite frankly, I was kind of feeling that way even before the pandemic happened, but I still think it was a significant factor because it meant that the end of my childhood happened sooner and more unexpectedly. You can never be truly prepared to enter adulthood, but at the very least, you usually know when it's coming. When I went home from school on that fateful day in March, I had no idea that those were my final hours in that phase of my life. It was a completely abrupt transition into a scary new world, and it's immensely frustrating that it happened. But with that said, even before all of this happened, when the world was running somewhat normally, I still kind of had this creeping feeling of, man, this is it, huh? That's what compelled me to really try my hardest to make the most of my time in those final days. My adolescence is ending. Did I really make the most of it? Could I have done things differently? Is it really coming to an end so soon? But however much I might have wanted in retrospect to go back and do things differently, however much I wished I had done more with my life leading up to that point, it didn't matter. The future was coming, and there was nothing I could do about it. Point is, growing up is scary. It's a lot to have to adapt to a new way of life with new responsibilities and challenges. Having to leave the comfort of childhood behind and move forward with the passage of time is a fateful, irreversible transition, and it can be kind of scary and even sad to think about. Like, wow, this is life, huh? It can make you wish that you could just go back and relive the good old days. And this is where nostalgia comes in. It's a well-documented phenomenon to reminisce on your youth and envision it as this paradise of joy and freedom. Those were the days. You were innocent and carefree and got to earnestly experience some of the greatest joys of your life. It can be fun and somewhat comforting to remember those past days because they just seem so great compared to how depressing and unfulfilling life is now. Of course, if you got to talk to your younger self and tell them that those are the greatest days of their life, they'd probably say, "The fuck are you talking about? I have a bedtime." But I'll admit I can definitely be a sucker for nostalgia, particularly through the medium of video games. They just make sense as nostalgia bait. Not only can they be fun, memorable experiences in their own right, they're also much more personalized to you, the player. Most everyone who plays video games remembers their first. Whether the game was actually good or not is subjective, but there are no doubt always going to be some positive emotions attached to your first game because, well, it was your first. You played it as a kid back when you were happy, and that game, if you continued on playing games after that, undeniably had an impact on the course of your life and your personality. So what was the point of me saying all this? Well, the fuck do you think I've been doing for the past 2 years? Well, Pokemon Platinum wasn't my literal first video game I ever played. It was the first true gaming adventure that I embarked on, and it was the one that really ignited my passion for gaming as a whole. I no longer have the original cartridge that I played the game on due to me being an idiot and losing it, but I still have a lot of memories attached to the game, so even when starting a fresh save file, for me, it's the quintessential nostalgic experience. And that's why, over 2 years ago, staring into the cold abyss of adulthood, I decided to have one more hurrah with a cornerstone of my childhood. Now, in deciding to play through Platinum again, it wasn't literally a conscious thought process of, well, I'm an adult now, I should relive childhood because that makes for a neat narrative. I wanted to replay it because I like it. But it just makes sense, doesn't it? That I'd seek comfort in something from the past while being forced to come to terms with the future. That in the midst of the fear and sadness that comes with growing up, the thing that I thought would bring me the most joy was something heavily tied to nostalgia. So while my choice to experience something from the past wasn't literally because of its contrast with the future, there's no denying that there's some sort of connection there. The future is scary and nostalgia is comforting, so of course I would play Platinum in that situation. And now, 2 years later, that journey is finally coming to an end. And I've gotten older and have only experienced more growing up in that time. The future now is just as scary as it was back then, and this whole nostalgia thing feels all the more relevant. But alas, the show must go on. This game has to end at some point. It's simply not possible to indulge in nostalgia forever. So today, we are taking on the Pokemon League and finally bringing this adventure to a close. We last left off right at the entrance of the Pokemon League with nothing left to do but take on the Elite Four and Champion and beat the game. So, in preparation for this final challenge, I do what any professional would do before they have to test their skills in a major competition. Drugs. It's something of a tradition for me in Pokemon games to hoard all my rare candies and vitamins that I get throughout the game and dump them all onto my party right before the Elite Four. Is it the most logical thing to do? Maybe not, but I tend to abide by the philosophy of, well, what if I need it later when it comes to items that there is a finite amount of, and the Elite Four is really the only time where that later actually comes and I can justify using the items to myself. I generally try to use them to complement my Pokemon's best stats, though with the HP up I use it to give a boost to party members that were lacking in HP, save for Weezer because his HP stat is beyond saving. Weirdly, I only had one PP up remaining, which I ultimately decided to use on Falco's Close Combat. The rare candies are nice for some last minute leveling up without having to grind, though Falco and Flowey were so close to the next level that I quick battled a few wild Pokemon in Victory Road. I generally try to make all members of my party the same level with any extras going to my starter, which is what I did here. Falco learned Brave Bird at level 49, which I replaced Aerial Ace with, and my team ultimately wound up all at level 50 except for Pingu, who is at level 53. Here I also truly reap the rewards of my constant use of the Amulet coin because I now have copious amounts of money to buy copious amounts of medicine. And with that, I'm finally well stocked and ready to take on the Elite Four. Oh, what are you doing here? Yes, right before we can take on the Pokemon League, we have to battle with our rival one final time. I enjoy this battle on a thematic level. It goes back to a point that I've talked about quite a few times, the general feeling of progress and accomplishment that comes with how much your party has grown and changed and how much your rival's party has grown and changed since your first battle all that time ago. It's also a legitimately challenging fight, nothing too crazy, but he has a well-balanced team that actually countered a lot of my type advantages pretty well. But in due time I defeat my rival and at long last we can face the Elite Four. Before going in though, I decided to give my Pokemon some held items for that extra bit of firepower. Held items aren't that useful in game, so I generally just kind of forget about them and don't use them, but when you're at the very end of the game, hey, why not give your team that little extra boost? I gave Flowey the Big Root, which raises the power of HP stealing attacks like Giga Drain, Weezer gets the King's Rock, which gives you a chance of making the opponent flinch, Meta Knight gets the Razor Claw, which increases the chances of landing a critical hit, Pingu gets the Quick Claw, which gives you a chance to bypass speed calculations and attack first, Gibby gets the Soft Sand, which increases the power of ground-type moves, and Falco gets the Amulet coin because I have nothing else to give him, so why not make some extra money? And with my team all ready to go, the person at the entrance counts off my badges and we begin the final challenge of the game. The first Elite Four up is Aaron, a Bug-type user. A Bug-type Elite Four is definitely an interesting choice since I feel like Bug-type Pokemon more than any other type tend to have the stigma of being weak and kinda pathetic. But then watch as a Vespiquen tanks a fly with 1 HP and wrecks Falco with Power Gem, who's weak and pathetic now. Nevertheless, the battle with Aaron overall wasn't brutally hard, but still a decent enough challenge to make it enjoyable. Why does he have a Drapion? That's not even a bug type! Next up is Bertha, a ground type user. She was definitely the easiest one of the bunch, having a Whiscash that's 4 times weak to Giga Drain, a Golem that's 4 times weak to Giga Drain, a Rhyperior that's 4 times weak to Giga Drain, and a Gliscor that's 4 times weak to Ice Punch. The Hippowdon took one hit at least. See, this is a sort of double-edged sword to having gym leaders and Elite Four specialize in a single type. It's fun thematically, but it does kind of undermine the excitement of the moment if you have a type advantage that makes them piss easy. The third Elite Four is our old friend Flint, at long last, an actual character that we've met before. He uses fire types, but Pingu actually didn't see much action because right off the bat his Houndoom used Sunny Day, which weakens water type moves. I ended up taking out the Houndoom with Pingu, the Infernape with Falco, and then swept the rest with Gibby. The fourth and final Elite Four is Lucian, a psychic type user who reads gross! One thing that's really noticeable about these Elite Four is how quickly their Pokemon level up between battles. Like, you go from battling a level 49 Yanmega to a level 59 Gallade, and it's like, you are vastly overestimating the amount of EXP I'm getting from these battles. I imagine it was more just a way to make the Elite Four be progressively harder as you advance through them, but still, these are some pretty big level gaps. And honestly, the level increases don't even do much for the overall challenge. Weirdly enough, Aaron was probably the most difficult for me to beat of the four. I definitely got kinda lucky in this battle with Lucian, with his Alakazam missing a Focus Blast, Weezer getting a flinch on the Bronzong thanks to the King's Rock, and Weezer managing to land a Night Slash through confusion, but still overall the fight just wasn't anything too crazy. So with all the Elite Four defeated, there remains only one final challenge: the Champion. This is an absolutely iconic moment in the series. Just that piano is enough to inspire fear in anyone who's played through the Sinnoh games. We enter the Champion's room and find who else but the person we've crossed paths with so many times throughout our adventure, Cynthia. This fight with Cynthia is absolutely notorious among Pokemon fans, and for good reason. Her team is absolutely nuts, being incredibly well balanced and just incredibly strong overall. Cynthia is a truly challenging opponent on a level rarely seen in this game or in a lot of Pokemon games in general. First up is her Spiritomb. Spiritomb is a unique Pokemon because its type combination gives it literally no weaknesses aside from the Fairy type, which didn't exist until X and Y released years after Platinum. That, combined with Spiritomb just being a fairly bulky Pokemon in general, led to me deciding to use Flowey to stall it out with Toxic. Toxic is a really helpful move for taking down bulky Pokemon like Spiritomb because not only is it a damage-dealing status effect, it's a damage-dealing status effect that increases in damage every turn, which makes it way easier to just stall your opponent out if you don't have super strong attacks. The Spiritomb did no Psychic, which is super effective against Flowey, but Flowey was able to survive it, including tanking one with literally 1 HP, and through the combination of Toxic, Giga Drain, and spamming potions, I was eventually able to take it down. Next up is her Togekiss. In keeping with my use every Pokemon in important battles rule, I switched over to Weezer, though he was probably the best party member to go with regardless. I got incredibly lucky by getting a freeze off of an Ice Punch, which led to me being able to take the Togekiss down completely unscathed. Next is her Lucario. I sent in Falco to take it down with a super effective close combat. I got one shot by an Aura Sphere, so I sent Flowey back in to weaken it with a Stun Spore and then revive Falco and spam Giga Drain until Flowey fainted, whereupon I could send Falco back in. And since the paralysis effect slowed the Lucario down, I was able to land a close combat and take it out. Oh, come on! Okay, so the Lucario survives with like 1 HP, takes out Falco again, and forces me to send in Weezer as a sacrifice to revive Falco and Flowey. Of course, because the Lucario is low on health, Cynthia uses a full restore, which makes sense except for the fact that she didn't use one on her Togekiss when it was in the same situation. I had always assumed that enemy trainers just automatically used healing items when their Pokemon was low no matter what. I'd be curious to see what prompted the AI to heal in the one case, but not the other. But regardless, this sets me back to square one, forcing me to send in Flowey again, paralyze the Lucario again, let Flowey get knocked out again, send in Falco again, almost take it out with a close combat again, watch Falco get taken out by an Aura Sphere again, and then just give up and send in Gibby to revive Falco and finish the job himself. Next up is her stupid piece of shit Garchomp. This damn thing is by far the most notorious Pokemon on her team because of its utterly unrivaled ability to fuck your shit up something fierce. First I send in Falco to lower its attack with the Intimidate ability, and then hopefully that might give Pingu a chance to survive an Earthquake. Oh! Cool! Is that another crit? That's fantastic! That's exactly what I needed right now! So next I send in Flowey as a sacrifice to heal Falco back up, and then send Falco back in to lower the Garchomp's attack again, use Double Team to make it possible to dodge its attacks, and then proceed to use the tried and true pro gamer strategy of spam potions until it misses something. This goes on for a while until finally it misses a Dragon Rush, at which point I use Double Team some more and then proceed to slowly take it out with Fly. I also revive Pingu along the way, and I realized that I literally spammed so many potions that the Garchomp ran out of PP for all of its damaging moves and was eventually forced to keep using Earthquake, which Falco is immune to. I will admit it doesn't feel that satisfying to finally defeat the Garchomp when I did it entirely through the power of luck and just having enough money to buy an assload of healing items, but you know, at least it's over. Next is her Milotic, and I send in Mennonite for his turn in the spotlight and try to take it out with Thunder Punch. Unfortunately, the Milotic is faster and its Surf takes out half of Mennonite's health. Thus, knowing Mennonite was going to get taken out either way, I decided to sacrifice him to revive Flowey so that he can use Stun Spore to lower the Milotic's speed. It knows Ice Beam. I should have seen that coming. So instead, I send Pingu back in to tank hits and revive both Flowey and Mennonite, and then send Flowey back in hopes that he can maybe survive an Ice Beam when he's at full health. Oh, is that another crit? That's so cool! Are you proud of yourself? Okay, new game plan, send in Mennonite again and go back to the old strategy of taking it out with Thunder Punch. I noticed that when Mennonite got hit by a Surf, his HP actually ended up being slightly more than half of his max HP, which made me think that he might actually be able to survive a second Surf and take the Milotic out. Time for a leap of faith. Not everything was meant to be, but thankfully Mennonite did get the Milotic down to low enough health that I was able to send in Pingu to finish the job with Surf. And with the Milotic down, there remains just one more Pokemon. Her Roserade. I decided to keep Pingu in as I think it's only fitting that he be the one to end the final battle. Then it turns out he can't survive 2 Energy Balls, so I switch into Falco instead. But then it turns out the Roserade is faster and Falco can't survive 1 Energy Ball, so I send in Gibby as a sacrifice to heal Falco and Pingu back up, and then we're back to using Pingu again. And so, at long last, Pingu is able to use Ice Beam to take down the Roserade and finally defeat Champion Cynthia. So we've come full circle. Just as we began this adventure with Pingu, we ended with Pingu. The battle with Cynthia is iconic for a reason. It really is the ultimate test of all your skills you've developed throughout the adventure, which is what a champion battle should be. It's the hardest battle in the game by far. Having to fight a team that's so diverse and so strong makes for a really tense and engaging final battle. And that level of excitement that comes from those difficult moments is what really makes the Pokemon experience for me. It's in those tough spots that you get your most memorable moments, coming up with some wacky strategy that eventually paid off, or getting some massive break from a stroke of luck, or taking massive gambles that may or may not work out helps to make the gameplay of Pokemon so much more personal and engaging. Everyone has different gameplay styles and uses different Pokemon, which means that everyone can develop their own unique memories of certain moments in the game. And this definitely shines through in the battle with Cynthia. Challenges like this make for the most exciting and memorable experiences, which is a big reason why this fight sticks out so much in the minds of so many fans. The battle with Cynthia is a truly thrilling event in the game, and it makes for a perfect way to cap off the journey. And with that battle all said and done, we have beaten the game. It's a truly triumphant moment to hear that uplifting music and walk alongside Rowan and Cynthia, two incredibly important and enduring figures of the story, and enter your Pokemon into the Hall of Fame. It's such a joy to watch the commemoration of your team, showing where you first met them and seeing them all together with you in that congratulatory final screen. It really reinforces a sense of bonding with your Pokemon, like they're not just members of your party in your RPG game, they're your companions who you went on an adventure with. This sense of bonding is quintessential to the Pokemon experience in my eyes, and I think it's a big factor in what makes the series so unique. And so with that, the credits roll and we can celebrate at long last. After all this time, we have finally finished the adventure through Pokemon Platinum. Wait, there's more? Yes, Platinum, like many Pokemon games, has an extensive amount of post-game content to explore after the credits roll. Post-game content is a staple of the series. I mean, it's hardly a Pokemon game if it doesn't have it. We start our post-game quest right back where we started the main adventure, in our bedroom. We head downstairs and oh yeah, I have a mom. She tells me that I need to head to Snow Point City to take a ship somewhere, so I do, and we end up in a fun new place called the Fight Area. As soon as we get off the ship, we meet up with our rival again, who takes us to the entrance of the Battle Frontier for a double battle with Falconer and Flint. This battle is kinda random, but it's a fun, neat way to start out the post-game at least. After the battle, we meet Palmer, who is the rival's dad and one of the big bosses of the Battle Frontier. We also talk to this guy named Buck, who I don't know, he's just a guy, but we'll see more of him later. There isn't much going on in the fight area. It mainly just serves as the resting place for the Battle Frontier, basically just a gauntlet of battles that take place under certain restrictions where you can try to achieve new records and win prizes. It's a beloved part of Pokemon games for a lot of people. I am not one of them. I just don't like the Battle Frontier, okay? I'm sorry, it's just battles. It's just endless battles over and over, winning tiny amounts of BP which you can eventually save up over thousands of years to buy a couple items. The problem is that the battles go from piss easy to having enemy Pokemon that actually have optimal stats and movesets that are just too tough for my ragtag in-game team to deal with. And Lord knows I am not spending all that time breeding and training Pokemon with perfect stats for the Aerial Ace TM. That being said, there actually is a bit more depth to this place than I remember. There's 5 different battle facilities: the hall, the castle, the arcade, the factory, and the tower, and each one has a different format that spices up the battling a tiny bit. First up is the Battle Hall. The goal here is to just go on the longest winning streak possible with just one Pokemon. I went with my trusty Pingu, and you can literally just pick what type you fight against. Look at this, I'm just mashing A through an army of Fire-type Pokemon who only go up like 1 or 2 levels each time. Where's the challenge here? Huh. Next is the Battle Castle. This one has its own special point system called Castle Points. You earn Castle Points from each battle, and you get more or less depending on how well you do. You can use them to heal up your Pokemon and buy items, as well as view your opponent's Pokemon between battles. It's kind of a cool concept because it adds some more strategy to the process beyond just what Pokemon and moves you use. In the Battle Arcade, there's a game board that modifies the conditions of each battle, such as putting status effects on you or your opponents, giving items, or affecting the way the battle board selects conditions. Again, just a nice way of adding a bit of variety. The Battle Factory has you using rental Pokemon instead of your own party, and you're told your next opponent's team ahead of time so you can select Pokemon and even trade out Pokemon with a previous opponent based on what your next opponent's team will be. I like it because it places more limitations on you and forces you to adapt to a different playstyle than what you're used to with your main team, which adds more of a challenge. And finally, we have the Battle Tower, which is the most traditional and straightforward of the bunch, just battling to 7 wins to get that sweet, sweet BP. There was also apparently a sort of ranked online mode where you could battle against other trainers over Wi-Fi. I don't think I ever actually actually did this, but it seems like a pretty cool idea at least. You can also team up with a friend via local wireless or with some of the traveling companions you met throughout the adventure for some double battles. Buck literally had legendaries, but I still had to carry his useless ass because he just spammed Mirror Coat the entire time. This gateway to the north of the fight area is blocked off by these two people who won't let you through until you see every Pokemon in the regional Pokedex. For the most part, you're able to see every Pokemon as long as you explore the game thoroughly in the main adventure and battle every trainer, but there can still be a few stragglers out there. I remember when I first played through this game, I got down to just one Pokemon left to see, and it turned out it was a Glaceon, which I never saw because I didn't battle this one singular trainer on Route 217. But this time, the Pokemon I'm missing are Uxie, Mesprit, Azelf, and Rotom. The first three are legendaries, while Rotom is technically not a legendary, but you can still only find one in the entire game. Specifically, you can find it in the Old Chateau, a little location tucked away in Eterna Forest that I weirdly forgot to visit the first time around. The Old Chateau is a weird little place. It's got a whole lot of creepy ambience to it, and occasionally you can even see ghost NPCs hanging out around the place. The main important thing here, though, is finding Rotom, which you can encounter by interacting with this TV at night. Unfortunately, it isn't nighttime right now, so I'll take care of the other missing slots in the Pokedex in the meantime. First on the agenda is a visit to Lake Verity to find Mesprit. Mesprit uniquely is a roaming legendary, so I'm not able to catch it right here and now, but talking to it does get it registered in the Pokedex, which is all I really need right now. Rowan, how did you even get in here? Next up is Lake Valor, where we can catch Azelf, and I've gotta say, this place looks pretty nice when it isn't dried out and blown to smithereens. Azelf is not a roaming legendary, which means I have to fight and capture it right now in order to get it in the Pokedex. Catching legendaries is a delicate art. It's really important to have Pokemon that are able to withstand hits and also inflict some sort of status condition, ideally either sleep or paralysis, and have an adequate supply of Pokeballs in order to make your life as easy as possible. Dusk Balls are the best bet, being 3.5 times more effective than a regular Pokeball if used at night or in caves where a lot of legendaries are found, followed by the Timer Ball, which can be up to 4 times more effective than a regular Pokeball, but only if the battle drags on for long enough, and finally Ultra Balls, which are only 2 times more effective than a regular Pokeball, but that modifier applies in all situations. Also make sure that you mash A when the ball starts shaking, it helps, I swear to Christ. I do definitely miss the olden days where people would spread superstitious stuff like that. You have to wonder where that kind of stuff originated and why so many players bought into it as kids. Also an important part of legendary battles, you have to be able to deal damage without dealing so much damage that you knock the Pokemon out, because although they do respawn, you have to beat the Elite Four and Champion again to make that happen. Really your best bet if you accidentally knock out the Pokemon is to make sure you save the game before starting the battle so that you can just reset and try again. Overall though, catching legendaries can be really enjoyable. It's a style of gameplay that's a lot different from how you play the game 99% of the time, and it's a fun challenge overall to try and catch all the legendaries in the game. Azelf overall wasn't too difficult to catch, just needed to whittle down its HP and paralyze it, and then I was eventually able to catch it in a Dusk Ball. Uxie took significantly longer, though I wouldn't say it was particularly difficult, I just had some worse luck and ended up wasting a fuck ton of balls before eventually catching it in an Ultra Ball. Well, since I have to wait for it to become nighttime to catch Rotom anyway, I might as well continue catching some legendaries. Mesprit, the next one up, is a roaming legendary, which is a Pokemon that can be encountered pretty much anywhere in the region, bouncing around to various routes at random. And when you do end up finding them, you only get one turn before they run away and you have to continue hunting for them unless you have an ability like Arena Trap or a move like Mean Look, which prevents enemy Pokemon from escaping. I don't. But anything you do in that one turn, like damaging them or inflicting a status condition on them, will carry over to the next encounter. So basically, roaming legendaries are just a long, drawn-out, stupid way of just battling a legendary and catching it normally. There is a way to make the process a bit less stupid in Platinum though. See, there's this app on the Poketch. I never talked about the Poketch, did I? The Poketch is essentially a little gimmick feature for the bottom screen. It has a bunch of apps that are designed to help you with various things, both in-game and in real life. Some of them are somewhat helpful, or at least interesting, but a lot of them are just kinda whatever and don't really do much for me. I mean, come on, what kind of idiot would use their video game console to do math? It is a cute little gimmick, it just doesn't really add much to the overall gameplay experience. However, there are two big things that it is genuinely helpful for, those being the dowsing machine, which allows you to scan for hidden items in your vicinity, and this map, which allows you to track roaming legendaries. So yeah, back to hunting for Mesprit. This app on the Poketch will show you the current location of roaming legendaries, but you can't just check a legendary's location on the map, fly there, and then be golden, because roaming legendaries move every time you enter a new location. So if you were to try and fly or walk to where it was, it would be gone as soon as you got there. The strategy that I used was to stand on a border between two separate locations, in this case right here between Route 205 and the Valley of Windworks, and repeatedly walk back and forth between them so that the game detects you entering a new location and moves the roaming legendary. Do it long enough and eventually the roaming legendary will land on the route you're currently in and you can go battle it. Yeah, it's a bit cheap, but it's miles better than doing it the quote-unquote real way. I mean, Christ, I get that having legendary Pokemon roaming around the region might add some more excitement from unexpectedly encountering it and provides more of a challenge with having to chase it down, but the problem is you can't really chase it because of how it automatically changes location whenever you change location. I think it would have been better to make it change locations on a timer so that if you see its location on the map, you can actually go try to find it. Yes, that would detract from the excitement of seeing it randomly, but you could maybe make the chance of actually encountering it in its location lower or something to compensate. Either way, I just think the current way of forcing the player to basically just sit around and wait for the RNG gods to bless them is just a bad way of handling legendaries, because people aren't just randomly hiking around the region doing stuff by this point in the game. They're either exploring one of the few remaining post-game areas, or they have literally nothing left to do and are just trying to catch the legendaries and move on with their life. I mean, hell, even with the cheapo method that I used, it still took a good while for me to actually catch the legendaries, which just really goes to show how damn tedious and annoying roaming legendaries are in this game. Nevertheless, with enough patience, I was eventually able to whittle Mesprit down enough and catch it with a quick ball. Quick balls are 4 times more effective than a regular Pokeball, making them tied with timer balls for the most effective Pokeball in the game aside from the Master Ball. However, unlike the timer ball where you have to wait 30 turns for it to get to its maximum effectiveness, the quick ball has 4 times effectiveness on the first turn of the battle only. They're pretty nice to just throw out right away at random wild Pokemon because you have pretty good odds of succeeding, but with legendaries they're not quite as helpful because legendaries have such low odds of being caught in the first place that it's pretty necessary to whittle down their health and inflict a status effect on them, which you obviously can't do on the first turn of a battle. The sole exception to this, of course, is the roaming legendaries, because even though their health and statuses carry over from previous encounters, each encounter still counts as a new battle, which means you can get the bonus from the quick ball and the bonus from weakening the legendary Pokemon. This makes for a nice little consolation prize for the pain of dealing with these stupid things. Next on the list is Dialga and Palkia. To make them appear, you first have to talk to Cynthia's grandma in Celestic Town, then you have to go into this cave in Mount Cornet, go up the waterfall, and head into this room to find the Adamant Orb and the Lustrous Orb. From there, continue up to the Spear Pillar, and the legendary Pokemon will appear in these 2 portals. Weirdly, you're forced to battle Dialga first unless you for some reason only got the Lustrous Orb, and you have to leave and re-enter the area after battling Dialga to make Palkia appear. These 2 were significantly tougher to catch than Azelf, Uxie, and Mesprit just because of how strong they are, with both of them being at level 70 with powerful attacks while all my Pokemon were in the low to mid 50s. But nevertheless, I was eventually able to catch them without too much trouble overall. Soon enough, it's nighttime, which means we're finally able to head back into the old chateau and catch a Rotom. It's only level 20 because you're able to battle it as soon as you're able to use Cut, which means I was able to catch it with just a quick ball. And with Rotom captured, we now have every single Pokemon registered in the regional Pokedex, which allows us to finally progress beyond the fight area. First, we just need to visit Professor Rowan, who will acknowledge your great achievement, and then Professor Oak shows up, gives you the national Pokedex, says something about the Pal Park, and then leaves. After doing that, we're finally able to head north from the fight area into Route 225. This marks the first official post-game route, and it's a lot of fun, featuring some fresh and unique geography and trainers with strong and interesting Pokemon that you don't get to see in the main campaign. At the end of the route lies the Survival area, which is a cool place, but there isn't much to do here at this point in the game, so its main purpose at the moment is for me to heal up my team at the Pokemon Center before proceeding on to Route 226. Route 226 is also pretty fun, featuring a lot of unique Pokemon and geography much like Route 225. It has a mountainous landscape which you need rock climb to be able to navigate. This is one of few areas where I think the use of HMs actually enhances the gameplay, as they were able to incorporate the HM into the level design to make something unique that they couldn't make otherwise. The second part of Route 226 is a water area, which you know how I feel about those. And there's a guy here that upgrades your Pokedex with the ability to see Pokemon descriptions in other languages. Immediately after this comes Route 227, which I think is probably the most enjoyable of the remaining post-game routes. It has steep mountainous terrain much like Route 226 with volcanic ash raining down from the sky. Early on in the route you come across Crasher Wake and your rival, who mention the Battle Frontier and a certain club in the Survival area. We're getting to that, I promise. And you also come across that Buck guy from earlier who tells you that there's something fishy going on at a place called Stark Mountain. This marks the final major event of the post-game, with the completion of the Stark Mountain quest unlocking pretty much everything else that you can do in the game. Right outside Stark Mountain we see 2 galactic grunts clearly up to no good, as they often are, and man, look at those lava pits, those are sick as hell! When we go inside we come across the 2 grunts along with Commander Mars, Commander Jupiter, and this guy named Sharon, or however the hell you pronounce it, who is also a commander and had been present earlier in the game but was never super relevant. Mars and Jupiter ask me what the hell happened to Cyrus and then challenge me to consecutive battles with each of them. After the battles they immediately decide to renounce their villainous ways because things just aren't as fun without Cyrus around. This leaves control of Team Galactic in the hands of Sharon, who is apparently just trying to make a quick buck, which is less apocalyptic than Cyrus's goals but is also quite a bit less interesting. He and the 2 other grunts retreat deeper into the cave and we have to go chase after them. In the face of the insurmountable obstacle of this single rock, I head back to the Survival area to swap out Flowey for a Pokemon that can use Rock Smash. I decided to go with Disaster instead of Bananarama this time because hey, he deserves a turn in the spotlight too. Soon enough, we once again meet up with Buck and he ends up becoming our double battle companion for our Team Galactic chasing escapade. fades. This trek through Stark Mountain is a lot of fun. The terrain is maze-like and tricky to navigate, the trainers and even the wild Pokemon make for challenging battles, and I've always found these partner segments to be really interesting and refreshing. We eventually catch up with Sharon and the two grunts in this little room at the end of the cave. Sharon muses of his brilliant plan to use the Magma Stone to awaken the legendary Pokemon Heatran, which he can then use to control the volcano and extort money somehow. But behold, our good friend Looker manages to disguise himself as a rock, take the Magma Stone back, arrest Sharon, and save the day. We head outside, and Looker informs us that with the arrest of Sharon, Team Galactic has been defeated for good. Buck returns the Magma Stone to its chamber and tells us to visit his abode in the survival area. Looker and I say our final goodbyes, and I head back into Stark Mountain to clear out the remainder of the area that I couldn't explore during the partner mission. It is kinda sad to see Looker go. He was never a super major character, but he was always a welcome presence and provided a bit of comedy relief at times. He also provided a good answer to the age-old question of Pokemon games. Where the hell are the adults? You do have to wonder sometimes why a child is the one in charge of stopping massive criminal syndicates from destroying the world, but with the addition of Looker and the International Police, the child is no longer the one in charge, they just have to do all the heavy lifting. Nevertheless, I liked Looker and he will be dearly missed. I then decide to take up Buck's offer to visit him in the survival area. This building here is known as the Battleground, and it's initially locked when you first visit the survival area, but it becomes accessible after completing the mission with Buck at Stark Mountain. Here you're able to rematch gym leaders as well as battle companion trainers from the double battle missions. You can battle a random selection of up to 4 of them once per day, and they're a pretty decent challenge. I used to do these battles all the time as a kid, and it's fun to be able to see these characters again and face them in much more difficult fights. It's just cool to see the game take the main gimmicks of these trainers, types for gym leaders, and Pokemon strong in a specific stat for the companion trainers, and go further with it, giving them much stronger and more well-rounded teams as a fun optional challenge. You can also battle your rival right outside the battleground on weekends, and his team actually scales up in level based on how many times you beat the Pokemon League, getting as high as the 80s. I don't have quite enough time left on this earth to spend it beating the Pokemon League 20 times, but I definitely did when I was a kid, and it's cool that the game included the level scaling to reward players that really squeezed everything they could out of the game. Next on the agenda is Route 228. This place is a desert route, which really helps it stand out as you don't see anything quite like it anywhere else in the game. There's a sandstorm active in battles at all times, damaging any Pokemon that isn't a rock, ground, or steel type each turn, which is a little annoying to deal with, but it doesn't change the gameplay too dramatically overall. We also meet this man here, who is evidently Cyrus's grandpa, which is a neat bit of world building at least. Next up is Route 229. This place is tiny, just a small little strip of land here, but I imagine it had to be its own separate route in order to differentiate it from the desert and not have the sandstorm effect, similar to how Route 217 is separate from 216, presumably because of its blizzard effect. After Route 229, we reach the resort area. This is the last new town of the post-game, and this guy right here randomly gives you your own personal villa for free. This seems to be basically just a neat little distraction where you can make your own custom dwelling, and I ordered a bed without checking the price and lost half my money, so that's enough of that. This guy here tells of a mysterious hidden ruler that supposedly lurks in the depths of the resort area's pond. This supposed hidden ruler always puzzled me so much as a kid, like what on earth spectacular Pokemon could I find? I vaguely remember hearing rumors of it being the legendary Pokemon Lugia, but as it turns out, the ruler is just a level 100 Magikarp that is possible to find using the Super Rod. It's not really worth my time, but I always love a good playground rumor in Pokemon games, and little random mini quests like these are nice to have. The final attraction of the resort area is the Ribbon Syndicate, an exclusive club only available to players who collect enough ribbons, little accessories that are awarded to your Pokemon for completing certain objectives. You get them from the Battle Frontier, the contests, beating the Pokemon League, and some other miscellaneous things. Basically, the closest thing this game has to achievements. They're entirely superfluous, and I never felt any desire to put in the effort toward getting a lot of them, and as a result, in all of my years of having this game and playing it to death, I still have never ever been inside this place. I guess it just goes to show that there's always more to discover in Pokemon games, and there always will be because I still do not feel like wasting my time on these. Next up is Route 230, which is just a water route that leads you to the other side of the fight area. I got nothing to say about it. And with this post-game area fully explored, it's about time we tackled the rest of the legendaries. Platinum has a ton of legendary Pokemon to capture, all in their own unique locations and requiring different things to get to them, which makes for a really fun and engaging post-game challenge. First on the list is Cresselia. To start this quest, we have to visit Canalave City and find this boy trapped in bed suffering from a nightmare. He needs a special item called the Lunar Wing to be freed from his nightmare, and it can be found somewhere on Full Moon Island, but the kid's dad, the city's boat captain, couldn't find it himself, so we have to do the job for him. So we take the boat to Full Moon Island, enter this little clearing here, and there stands Cresselia, but what? Where'd it go? When Cresselia disappears, it drops the Lunar Wing. The captain couldn't find it. This is literally the only damn place you can go on this island. We then head back to Canalave City and use the lunar wing to rescue the boy from his nightmare. All's well that ends well, but we still have to deal with the whole Cresselia thing. Cresselia is another roaming legendary, and I don't really have anything to say about that I haven't already said, but rest assured that although it was a bit of a tedious process, I was able to slowly weaken and capture Cresselia without much issue. But Cresselia is not the last roaming legendary of this game. If you travel to Eterna City, you can find Professor Oak, who... he's not here. If you go to the Pal Park, you can find Professor Oak, who tells you a bit about the place and then leaves to go to Eterna City. But before I go, I guess it's a good time to talk about the Pal Park. The Pal Park is the latest in Pokemon transfer gimmick technology, where you can capture Pokemon that you send from the Gen 3 games. You need to have the game in the GBA slot of your system, which makes Nintendo's decision to get rid of the GBA slot after the DS Lite pretty annoying, but I'm playing an emulator, so I kinda can't do it anyway. It is possible, but it's a pretty convoluted process, and besides, I don't even have GBA save data to transfer Pokemon from. But you know, it was kinda neat at the time, and I do recall having a bit of fun with it way back when. Anyway, after you meet him at the Pal Park, you can find Professor Oak in Eterna City, where he releases the birds. Articuno, Zapdos, and Moltres are legendaries originating from the Kanto games, but were made obtainable in Platinum, which I think is a really fun addition. A problem that I ran into early on was that Zapdos is actually faster than all my Pokemon except for Gibby, which meant that I couldn't use Flowey to paralyze it with stun spores, it would just flee first. Luckily, I was still able to use Gibby to whittle down its HP, but losing the added bonus of the paralysis effect definitely made things more difficult. I guess I can't say that overall catching the 3 birds was hard, but it was definitely tedious, and I think it really demonstrates the insanity of roaming legendaries as a whole. It took me almost an hour to capture all 3 of them, and that was with me using my stupid easy mode strategy and heavily utilizing the emulator's speed up feature. Next up is Heatran, which can be found in Stark Mountain, in the same place where we found Sharon during that earlier mission. Heatran wasn't too big of a, oh come on, a crit? Heatran wasn't too big of a problem for me. It wasn't capable of dishing out much damage, so it just took a couple of attacks and some Dusk Balls to catch it. This marks the final normal legendary encounter in the game. All the ones remaining are event legendaries only obtainable through special limited edition items. See, the Pokemon Company distributed special items over Wi-Fi throughout 2009, which would unlock special events that would allow players to capture legendary Pokemon not otherwise in the game or in any other game in the series. Of course, that was over a decade ago. Jesus Christ, that was over a decade ago? But thankfully, the inevitable march of time is no match for cheat codes. I'm still gonna complain about it though. Event legendaries are just kinda dumb. Like yeah, let's just lock a whole ass Pokemon behind whether you happen to have Wi-Fi and kept up with Pokemon news during this 1 month in 2009. I do kinda get it because it does add an extra layer of novelty and prestige to these so-called mythical Pokemon, but these things are so damn cool, why can't they be more accessible to everyone? And for people who actually want to catch them all, you know, the slogan of the franchise, well I guess you're shit out of luck, you stupid idiot. It's just dumb to make the ability to obtain certain Pokemon completely out of the player's control. Make them hard and complicated to find, sure, but don't put them on a real life time limit. At the very least though, the events in this game are pretty cool. Yeah, see, these were the days when the events were actually events and not just showing up in the Pokemon Center where a guy says, here's your all-powerful destroyer of worlds, you stupid fuck. The first special event item is the Secret Key, which doesn't technically unlock a special legendary, but it does unlock the only way to change Rotom's form in these games. See, nowadays it's pretty standard procedure for these games to have some way to change Rotom's form, but back in the olden days, being able to change his form was something pretty special. After picking up the Secret Key from a Pokemart, you have to head to the Team Galactic building in Eterna City, then interact with this wall on the corner and you'll unlock a secret room. Rotom can change into 5 alternate forms based on various household appliances, and each form will let it learn a certain move of a given type, and interestingly, when it changes from one appliance to another, that special move it learned will automatically change to the respective special move of the new appliance. It can change into a microwave with the move Overheat, a fan with Air Slash, a fridge with Blizzard, a washing machine with Hydro Pump, and a lawnmower with Leaf Storm. In newer games, it also changes type to match its appliance, but in the original game, it stays Electric Ghost for all of them. Rotom is really such a fascinating Pokemon. I think its gimmick has become less spectacular nowadays as it's devolved from its semi-legendary status and its alternate forms have become easier to obtain, but there is definitely something special about how Rotom is in Generation 4. There's just such a fun magic and mystery to Rotom that's really driven home by this special event. And what, Rowan, how do you get in these places? Next up is Regigigas, and this event is probably the stupidest one in the game. See, you can catch Regigigas in the game normally without a special event in the Snowpoint Temple, but you need to have Regirock, Regice, and Registeel in your party. You can find these guys in the Gen 3 Hoenn games, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, and transfer them over to your Platinum game using the Pal Park. But what if you don't have one of the Hoenn games? Well, Pokemon Platinum solves that problem because the 3 Regis are actually obtainable in-game. You can find Regirock in the Rock Peak Ruins on Route 228, Regice in the Iceberg Ruins in Mount Coronet, and Registeel in the Iron Ruins on Iron Island. There's only one problem with catching the Regis in this game. You actually can't. Okay, so basically, Toys R Us did an event in March of 2009 where they distributed the special Regigigas to Diamond and Pearl. This event ended one day before Platinum's release in North America, but if you were to trade the special Regigigas from Diamond or Pearl to Platinum, then you'd actually be able to catch the other 3 Regis. So basically, in order to catch a Regigigas in this game without the use of other games, you need to already have a Regigigas. Like, why? If you're gonna lock the 3 Regis behind an event, at the very least don't give us a Regigigas for free and completely negate the existence of the in-game one. This event actively discourages putting in time and effort to reap the rewards of a cool legendary Pokemon by just plopping a level 100 in your lap for the sole price of visiting Toys R Us. I think event legendaries are kinda dumb to begin with, but I especially hate the events where you literally just get a Pokemon without doing anything, which have become incredibly common in more recent games, but I especially hate this one because it actively detracts from an experience that was already in the game. This is one of the most nonsensical things I've seen in this game, but with all that said, I'm still gonna catch the in-game Regigigas because I can't just let the bastards win. Catching the 3 Regis for what it is kinda fun, getting to venture into these old caves and step on these fun colored circles. Capturing them was not much of a challenge. They're all level 30, so they didn't pose much of a threat to my team, and honestly, the biggest risk of these battles was accidentally knocking them out. I literally caught Registeel in a quick ball. When visiting the Pokemon Center during my quest to catch the 3 Regis, I found out that my Regigigas previously had something called Pokérus, signified by this little symbol in its summary menu. In the game world, Pokérus is basically a benign virus that can occasionally appear on Pokemon. It can spread to other Pokemon in your party and your PC, though it doesn't appear that any of my team members got it. As far as in-game functionality, it doubles the amount of EVs a Pokemon gains from defeating other Pokemon even after its infection period is over, making it actually quite beneficial. However, after the infection period ends, it can no longer be spread to other Pokemon, and it's incredibly rare to encounter in the game naturally, so it's not as though it's a must-have or anything. But it is a neat little oddity that can be cool to stumble upon randomly given how rare it is. With the 3 Regis captured, all I need to do is add them to my party, and I have to remove the stupid ball capsules for fuck's sake, and gain access to the Snow Point Temple from Candace's blessing. Make our way through some sliding ice puzzles down into the basement, and level 1 legendary. Honestly, I just think it's funny to have this big bad legendary Pokemon be so weak and pathetic that I literally can't use any attacks and just have to rely on poison to damage it. It actually took a pretty long time to catch this thing due to lacking the effects of paralysis, and later when I did switch to paralyzing it, lacking the effects of it having low health. If I'd gotten a Pokemon with a move False Swipe, which always leaves the opponent with at least 1 HP, it probably would have been easier, but come on, I don't have that much initiative. Next up is the event for Manaphy. They literally just give it to you. However, this is different from most events where they just give you a legendary for free because it does actually require some effort on your part. See, the Manaphy event in this game is not the typical distribution event. You actually have to have one of the Pokemon Ranger games, a spin-off series released on the DS. In all 3 of them, you're eventually able to unlock a Manaphy egg, which you can then transfer to any of the Generation 4 games, which you can then pick up in a Pokemart to hatch. It even has its own unique sprite to make it stand out from normal Pokemon eggs. I think it is fun to have that sort of interactivity between the main series and the spin-off games, but that said, I still don't really like the idea of locking content in this game behind ownership of another game. Manaphy is a bit of an interesting Pokemon because although it's seemingly a legendary, unlike most legendaries, it's capable of breeding, albeit only with Ditto. And breeding the Manaphy with a Ditto is necessary for obtaining another legendary Pokemon, Phione. However, obtaining and hatching that Phione egg takes a long ass time, and I'm not doing that, so you're just gonna have to take my word for it. Interestingly, despite its similarity with Manaphy and the fact that it's produced by breeding Manaphy, Phione does not actually evolve into Manaphy. The 2 Pokemon aren't linked by evolution in any way. It makes these Pokemon some fun little oddities, although they lack very much actual relevance in the games. Our next event is the event for Darkrai, and it's definitely one of the strangest events in the game. We first have to receive an item called the Members Card and then check out the Harbor Inn in Canalave City, a building that's ordinarily locked. This weird guy says some cryptic things and then forces you to rest in a bed, which somehow transports you to this place called New Moon Island. It's basically a mirror of Full Moon Island where we found Cresselia, and we find Darkrai right here in this little clearing. Darkrai is interesting because besides the visual parallel of Full Moon and New Moon Islands, it also is seemingly connected to the Cresselia quest despite it being an event Pokemon. When you visit the child who's having a nightmare, he says, "Dark is watching me," evidently a reference to Darkrai given its name and the fact that Darkrai is known to cause terrible nightmares according to in-game lore. The Cresselia and Darkrai events aren't actually connected in-game in any way, but it's a fun little way to tie the game's world together. The event for the legendary Pokemon Shaman has us receiving an item called Oak's Letter, a letter from Professor Oak simply telling us to go to Route 224. Route 224 will be the final new post-game route that we explore. It's accessible through the eastern end of Victory Road, a segment which is blocked off until after you beat the game. Once we gain access to this part of Victory Road, we come across this person named Marley, who will be our partner for one final companion trainer mission. This part wasn't too tough overall, but it was a little annoying to be down 2 Pokemon, having to have the Manaphy egg in my party as well as Bananarama to use Defog so I can C. Route 224 itself is a lot of fun. The trainers are strong and well-rounded, and the area itself is quite pleasant. At the end of the route, Marley comes back and we meet up with Oak to inspect the stone tablet. We're supposed to enter in the name of the person that we want to thank most. I put in memes because I'm really funny. After doing this, flowers bloom all over the area, and oh my god, what is that? Shaman appears and goes back the way it came, and we have to chase it down the sea break path, which is... really fucking long. Eventually, we reach the Flower Paradise where we can finally initiate the battle, which interestingly uses the regular wild Pokemon battle theme. The Shaman is only level 30 and I caught it in a quick ball, so that's the end of that. On my way back down the Sea Break path, my Manaphy egg finally hatched and Oak and Marley have disappeared. After catching Shaman, you can bring it to this person in Floroma Town to get yourself a Gracidia flower, which when used transforms Shaman into its Skyforme. It's a grass flying type and is pretty damn cool looking, but it will revert back to its normal landform if it gets put into PC, it gets frozen, or it becomes nighttime. It's a fun little novelty, and it weaves the game's lore together with the gameplay to give the game just a little bit more depth. And now that Shaman's out of the way, it's time for our final event Pokemon of the game. Arceus. Arceus is basically the god Pokemon, set in in-game folklore to be the one who created the universe, and has the unique mechanic of changing forms when given plates, little trinkets that can be found throughout the region. These plates all correspond to a certain type, and boost the power of attacks of that type when given to a Pokemon, but when given to Arceus, they change its form and type as well as the type of its signature move, Judgment. It's another fun way to tie lore and gameplay together, and makes Arceus stand out a lot more. To obtain Arceus, we need a special event item called the Azure Flute. We then have to travel all the way to the Spear Pillar where the game will prompt us to use the flute. Upon playing the flute, a special mystical staircase appears which gains us access to the Hall of Origin. Interestingly, although Arceus was distributed during an event, the Azure Flute itself never was, meaning that this event has never actually been legitimately accessible in the game. The only way to access it is through the use of cheat codes. Apparently, despite it being coded into the game, they decided to not actually distribute the Azure Flute because they felt that the event might be too confusing for players. How is it confusing? All you do is walk. It's no more complicated than the other events that were actually distributed. Nevertheless, we're here now, which means it's time for our final legendary battle. Today, we're gonna capture God. What? You know, for all my complaining about that event Regigigas, I have realized that it does actually provide one beneficial thing. It comes with 20 ribbons, which means I can finally access the Ribbon Syndicate, bitches! Yeah, let me in, fuckhead. Finally, after all these years, I can see what I've been missing out on. Huh. Yeah, there really isn't much to this place. The only things you can do here are buy ribbons and get a massage for your Pokemon to make it more friendly. It's fine and all, but I guess I really wasn't missing out on much all these years. That being said, it is still kinda cool that even after all this time, there's still stuff in this game that I had never done and now get to experience for the first time. If nothing else I did in this playthrough was really new, at least this was. With that out of the way and all the legendary Pokemon captured, there remains just one more thing to do. Another go-around at the Pokemon League. The Elite Four and Champion all have toughened up teams that you can fight in rematches after beating them the first time, though their teams don't actually change until after you complete the Stark Mountain quest. They provide a really solid challenge, and it's quite a fitting way to finish off the playthrough. Before doing that though, I decided to visit the survival area so I can rematch my rival one more time. It wasn't a super tough fight or anything, but it was fun and a good final send-off for our escapades with this character. Overall, I like the rival in this game. He's not a gigantic asshole, but he's not a complete pushover bitch boy who constantly sings your praises and tells you how awesome you are. He's energetic and confident, but still able to recognize your skills and his shortcomings while still keeping his head up and working to improve himself. It helps to make the relationship between the rival and the main character one where they're actually friends who respect each other while still competing with one another, i.e. rivals, which is a great character dynamic that I really appreciate. And from a personal standpoint, I do respect the character and do find joy and excitement in battling him even without him being a dick, which is, at least seemingly to a lot of people, what typically motivates the player to want to defeat their rival. Basically, he manages to be a rival without being your enemy, so he's able to be both an enjoyable opponent that you're excited to defeat and your friend when it really matters in the story. The rival in Pokemon Platinum is a well-rounded and fun character that I enjoyed seeing throughout the game. And with that, I bring my team through one final grind session and set off to the Pokemon League for one final challenge to end our adventure. In embarking on this grand quest, I sought to pick apart as many elements of Pokemon Platinum as I could to assess whether it holds up against my childhood memories of it. And overall, I would say that it does. Although this playthrough is very different in a lot of ways to how I experienced this game as a kid, it was still a tremendously fun time that I thoroughly enjoyed. But why exactly is that? What does make Pokemon Platinum so great in my eyes? Well, I've got to admit, it's been hard to come up with any sort of satisfying answer. This is in large part because I just find it really hard to explain why things are good in general. When something's bad, there are usually some specific flaws that I can point to and say, this thing sucks because of X, Y, and Z. But when something's good, I don't know, it's just good. I mean, Christ, take a drink every time I've said something is fun or neat or interesting or cool. I won't pay for your funeral, but I will respect your dedication. But throughout this whole playthrough, I have noticed one unifying theme that really encompasses my love for this game. So this is the best conclusion I've got. I like Pokemon Platinum because I like it. I mean, isn't that what really matters at the end of the day? That you had a good or bad time playing a game? I had a ton of fun playing through Pokemon Platinum as a kid, and I had a ton of fun with it this time around. And for that reason, Pokemon Platinum is my favorite game of all time. And of course, I'll always have an emotional attachment to this game because of my childhood experiences with it, but there's nothing wrong with that. Games are meant to be experienced how you want to experience them, and if your experience with a game was great, whether because of the game itself or because of general feelings and memories that you associate with it, then what other reason do you need to love a game? This playthrough was a highly personal experience, both in the stuff that I experienced while playing and in the memories of past experiences that got revived while I was playing, and it all adds up to make my own unique feelings and memories about the game that no one else will have in quite the same way. Nostalgia can blind you to bad things, absolutely, but it can also really add to your enjoyment of good things and make games, or whatever it is you do, a truly special moment in your life that is unique to you and you alone. Pokemon Platinum is special to me, and it always will be. So all in all, does Pokemon Platinum, played today through as critical a lens as I can muster, stack up to my positive feelings about it that come from my childhood memories? Yes, it does. But it's just not the same. Although this journey was intended to be a revisiting of my childhood, and it indeed brought back a lot of old memories from that time, at the end of it all, I'm still the same 20-year-old dude. Still scared of the future, still bitter and resentful over all the life I didn't live and all the things I can no longer do. Still unsure of what exactly to do with myself and how to navigate this strange new world of adulthood. And it's made all the worse by the fact that I don't have that original cartridge anymore. Yeah, you know, my favorite game of all time, I didn't care enough to actually try to keep it safe. To this day, I still don't know where, when, or how I lost that cartridge. I remember having lost it for a while before eventually finding it literally just underneath a shelf, which really shows the amount of care and attention that I gave it at the time. And of course, I have since lost it once again and haven't been able to find it anywhere, so I think this time, it's gone for good. It really sucks because that cartridge held so many childhood experiences on it. Even if I can never play it for the first time again, at least having that cartridge would provide so much insight into my time playing it as a kid, seeing what Pokemon I had and what I did with them and how I generally experienced the game. It would have been an absolute treasure trove of information about my past experiences, a time capsule that would let me reconstruct some of my life history. But now, all I have are memories. Memories of a bygone era that I can never get back.
There's a cow over there.
It's a horse. God. What a disaster. I should have known this was never gonna happen. All I wanted was to get back an old game cartridge. Just to have a little taste of my childhood. Just to have some of those memories back. Is that so wrong? Like, is that so much to ask for? Why can't I ever have nice things? Why can't I just get some of those memories back?
I think you should have just hung on to the game.
I know. I made a mistake. But now I'm trying to fix it. That's what you're supposed to do when you make a mistake. But just my luck, there's just nothing I can do about it.
Now you're getting it.
Go away, I don't have your stupid tokens.
It's not about the tokens, dude.
What do you mean? Wasn't that the whole point of everything that just happened?
No, idiot. That was a teaching moment.
How many more things do I have to learn? Why can't I just have something go right for once?
Look, there is no lost cartridge of Pokemon Platinum that I can summon for you. The past is the past. It's gone. It's over. What's done is done. But the future is still coming, whether we like it or not. You don't get to change how fast time goes by, but you get to choose what you do about it. Your past is important, and it's okay to acknowledge it, but it doesn't do any good to keep dwelling on it. You can't do anything to change it at this point, so trying to somehow revive it or fix it is just going to make you miserable. You need to accept that and learn to embrace all the opportunities that the future holds. There is so much life left to see, and you have so many games that you still haven't played. Like, so many. Like, seriously, stop playing the same old games. You have so many games that you haven't played. And you need to be okay with letting go of the past and making the most of the time that you have right now.
God, I hate when you're right. It's over, isn't it? This is something I've realized while revisiting my childhood. Nothing lasts forever. It's very strange to come back to such an important game in my life and know that I can never experience it in the same way ever again. Sure, I can remember the best I can, and hell, I could pretend to be my younger self and spam Aquajet and use only 2 Pokemon again, but I can never truly recreate those original experiences. That's just not how it works. Every single day, hour, minute of your life, you can only experience once. You only get to be young and innocent and experience those wonderful nostalgic moments once. And there's something very poetic about that. It is sad that I can never go back and relive those joyous, memorable moments that I had all those years ago, but that's also kind of what makes them so special. The things that I did or didn't do in the past, whether it was 10 years ago or 10 hours ago, I can't change them. They are a part of my life, and they're what make me, me. Every phase, every event, every milestone in your life will come to an end eventually. Time will always continue to march on no matter what you do. But every moment in time offers unique opportunities that can help make it enjoyable and memorable. So while the past is undoubtedly important, it's also important not to let yourself get so bogged down in bitterness and resentment over the good old days that you miss your chance to make good new days with the life that you have right now. Pokemon Platinum will always be an important part of my life, and I do often wish that I could experience it for the first time again. And more generally, there's a lot of good stuff that's happened in my life that I wish I could go back and experience again, and a lot of bad stuff that I wish I could go back and do differently. But there is literally nothing I can do about it now. The best I can do is learn from my past experiences, good and bad, and use them to make choices now to make my present life better. So what's the ultimate takeaway from this whole adventure? Getting older and experiencing new things is an inevitable part of life. And life is short. We only have so much time to do anything in any phase of our lives. So it's important to not dwell on the past and get caught up in nostalgia or regret, and to instead use those past experiences to build a better future. It is time to move on.
God damn it, what do you want? I told you, we're not taking your trash games.
No. I have something better this time.
Right this way.
You know, I guess I was wrong about you. You are capable of not hoarding.
Well, this year, I guess I just decided it was time to move on.
Well, game section's over there. Feel free to take a look around.
Look who finally decided to join us.
Hey, we haven't been able to find a token yet, but we're working on it.
They have FIFA here. This is great.
Dude.
Hey, don't worry about it. I've realized that there are things more important than clinging to the past.
Oh yeah, the past sucks. Future's where it's at. I mean, my childhood didn't have FIFA 23. Speaking of, I got some matters to attend to.
Yeah, me too.
You know, Garrett, I realized something today. You can never do everything in life exactly perfectly. Well, I can, but I'm built different, so everyone has some sort of regret or something that they wish they would have done differently. But there's nothing you can do to change it at this point. It sucks to move through life and see how many doors have closed to me. But it's also cool to see how many doors have opened. The future is cool, and from now on, I'm gonna embrace it.
Well, I guess you could say this is a nostalgia trip to Pokemon Platinum.
Yeah.